G'day, mate. 40 here. We should be going out live over Rumble. We should be going out live over Odyssey, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. So let me pull everything together here. What the heck? All right, let's listen to a little Richard Spencer commentary.
This obviously rather absurd nonsense. But what I think was why I think it's a death blow is that that's actually, that kind of stuff is not going to appeal to regular Joe conservatives. And that kind of demeaning someone, ridiculing someone is far more powerful than treating them as powerful. Like when they treat Nick as Darth Vader and they're like, this guy,
Okay, so he's talking about Nick was on Jimmy Kimmel. Like Jimmy Kimmel was making fun of Nick Fuentes and played Nick going on a rant about how having sex with women is gay. So I didn't expect to see Nick Fuentes showing up on that.
Action denier, he's an anti-vaxxer, he's all the bad things. But I think this more than anything sums this gentleman up.
What, people calling me gay because I've never had a girlfriend? I think if anything, it makes me less gay. Never having a girlfriend, never having sex with a woman, really makes you more heterosexual. Because honestly, dating women is gay. Having sex with women is gay. And having sex with men is gay. And you know, it's all gay.
That was the Christmas episode, by the way. Fuentes made a statement today saying Trump didn't know who he was, and he didn't mean to bring any negative attention.
Look, I think Fuentes was just making a joke, so he isn't seriously trying to argue that having sex with women is gay.
Yeah,
like you feel like,
and I find him utterly boring. It's just so, I just find him to be an extremely boring commentator, comedian. Anyway. Regardless, I think he actually dealt a death blow to Fuentes last night, because what was happening in other ways was they were talking about Fuentes's kind of what was happening based opinions, and it was basically Fuentes as a young man just kind of sounding off and seeming, I guess you could say a bit badass of like, we need a Catholic dictatorship in this country. We're going to make everyone play by our rules, et cetera, et cetera. And look, we can say what we want about that, but I think the promotion of all this kind of based stuff, and also like, we've tried the liberation of women and look where it's gotten us, go back to the kitchen, you bitches, basically. That kind of stuff, when you promote that, my guess is that yes, a ton of liberals will be totally outraged and be just like, oh, mask off, this guy's a total maniac. I imagine as well, a ton of conservatives will basically hear this kind of stuff and be like, well, he's a little, he's a little edgy and out there, but yeah, he's kind of our guy. So it was basically promoting Fuentes. I do think that they dealt a death blow on Jimmy Kimmel when they showed this clip that I remember seeing. I think it was from a year ago.
I don't think that's a death blow. Do you honestly think that's a death blow to Nick Fuentes? I think younger people understand that when you're doing a live stream, you're just popping off with everything that comes into your head. This is one of the tricks that they recommend for live streamers. Go on YouTube, put in like how do I become a YouTube live streamer? Like how do I fill the dead air? And one of the tricks that they say is like just say anything that comes into your head, as long as it's not absolutely horrible. So Nick Fuentes does like a 2-hour live stream almost every night for years. That's very difficult to do. The only way you can pull off something like that is if you just say, any, random thing that comes to your head. The more transparent you are, the more likely you are to connect with the audience. So that was Nick going on a rant. I don't think that this clip played on Jimmy Kimmel will be a death blow.
Maybe it was from 2 years ago. He's there with a Christmas creche on the table while he's speaking. So it must have been around this time of year, last year or the year before. And he goes into this rather hilarious, ultimately diatribe about how having sex with women is in fact gay. And, I'm a proud incel, and gays actually will have sex with women. I'm not even, I'm sure that happens to some degree. I don't even want to talk about the accuracy of that, You know, gays will sometimes have sex with women. So having sex with women doesn't make you heterosexual, in fact. And you know, when you're having sex with women, you're focused on them. You're kind of demeaning yourself, is what I think he's saying. And so, ergo, having sex with women is gay. Now, also having sex with men is gay. So it's in fact all gay. And this obviously rather absurd nonsense. But what I think was why I think it's a death.
You don't think most people realize that that was just absurd nonsense? I mean, I had someone get mad at me the other day. I was asking some guy in his 20s about Kurrumbong and Avondale College. I said, like, where's Lover's Lane these days? Like, where do young Seventh-day Adventist couples go to make out? And someone objected, you're talking a lot of crap. And frankly, I'm offended. Well, yeah, I was talking crap. I was just making light of things. I was just, you know, going on an absolute riff. I don't think anyone takes this Nick Fuentes rant too seriously. It's entertaining, right? Nick Fuentes, Rush Limbaugh, talk show hosts, live stream hosts, they are largely in the genre of entertainment. So to say things that are compelling and entertaining, you have to say something that's unexpected. And this was completely unexpected. I think most people who understand these genres understand that this is entertainment.
Flow is that's actually, that kind of stuff is not going to appeal to regular Joe conservatives. And that kind of demeaning someone, ridiculing someone is far more powerful than treating them as powerful. Like when they treat Nick as Darth Vader and they're like, this guy, you know, forget Roe v. Wade being overturned. This guy wants to establish a Catholic dictatorship. You're treating him as Darth Vader, basically. He's this big, bad, willing to go all the way, extreme, etc. That actually is, yes, you're going to develop a lot of pushback against him, but you're also going to kind of make him attractive and interesting and cool. When you ridicule someone, you're ultimately dealing a death blow. And I think this was a death blow. Now, the other kind of...
Okay, it's a lot harder to effectively deal a death blow to someone who doesn't take himself overly seriously. So Nick Fuentes is fluent in internet ironic speech, right? He understands the medium. I think it's Richard here who doesn't understand the medium that Nick is working in.
Tragedy of Nick Fuentes is that all of that incel behavior, like, is Nick Fuentes an incel, an actual incel? I have a hard time believing that. For one thing, if you gain any sort of fame or even infamy, you become very attractive. You're the alpha.
Right, but not everyone with fame and was the subject of attraction wants to go to bed. I remember when I was writing on the porn industry, all these women would hit on me, all these porn stars would hit on me, and I would just act oblivious because I just didn't want to get involved with most of them. So a lot of people who, you know, are pursued, right, simply for various reasons, don't want to go to bed with strangers.
And it's hard not to get chicks. You know, like if you play bass in a minor heavy metal band, you're going to get chicks.
Yeah, Richard took advantage of his opportunities to have sex with a lot of women. Not every guy is going to do that, right? Some people think that that's an incredibly intimate deed that you should only do with people that you know very, very well. Some people are simply intent on not self-destructing, and they understand that the more sexual partners you have, the more likely something is to go terribly wrong and your whole life and career to destruct.
Just is the way of the world. And so Nick has been notorious for a number of years. And so it just strikes me as impossible that he hasn't been kind of like propositioned or...
Yeah, he's been propositioned. Not everyone goes for that.
Been in situations where he could get laid really easily. So I find it difficult to believe that he's an incel. I mean, there's the insinuation that Nick is gay, that nonsense with the cat boy a number of years ago. Perhaps, I don't know. You know, it's speculation. I could kind of see it, but I could also not see it. I don't know what to say. I think he's sexually screwed up, as a lot of young people are, by the internet and online pornography and all that kind of stuff. I think it's actually a bit hard to imagine, for me at least, as...
It's also entirely possible that he's living for things greater than his own sexual satisfaction. So I think most people don't understand living a life that transcends satisfying their own primal desires. But there are people, right? There are people who have goals, who have values, who have commitments, who have discipline to live a life that transcends their immediate basic primal desires. Most people don't, right? Most men will have sex with attractive young women if they're given the opportunity and they think they can get away with it. But there are people, and Nick may be one of them, who live for things much greater, more lofty than satisfying their sexual desires, and they're willing to keep their sexual desires in a closet, so to speak, so that they can pursue other goals. They don't want to be tied down. They don't want to be compromised. They don't want their life to be blown up. They don't want all the complications that come with sexual intimacy, because they have other goals, other purposes, other joys in life, other aspirations that transcend their sexual impulses. There are such people. It doesn't make them gay or incels or mentally defective. Some of them are, many of them are not.
Someone in middle age, like what it's like to be a 10-year-old who's seen online pornography. I think it's actually really traumatic and kind of, it screws you up. It's very unhealthy, in my opinion. And it's kind of different than when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, where we would like...
Nick would have no problem finding a girlfriend, but it is possible some people live in their teens and 20s, particularly dedicated to building their kingdom, right? Men basically from about age 18 to 22 until they're about 40, usually are primarily concentrating on building their kingdom. And so there are a lot of guys like Tom Wolfe, he didn't marry until his early 50s. A lot of guys in their 20s into their 30s who are just so focused on building their kingdom, getting ahead in their career, following their mission, serving their transcendent purpose. I mean, there are a lot of men who've been priests for years, and then finally they drop out of it in their 30s, say, to get married. But it's not that unusual among highly intelligent, highly dedicated, disciplined people who have a sense of mission and purpose and see themselves as world historical figures to just put their sex life or love life on hold for a few years.
Either buy or even like shoplift a Playboy or Penthouse or something, and someone would have it. And, there's a kind of like limiting factor to it where, you could only see that at certain times. And it was this, treasure that you acquired through money or theft. There's just this, it was very limited. And being a young person now who's online.
Yes, I remember those years when I was desperate to get my hands on a Playboy or a Penthouse magazine, but not every guy was as desperate as me, right? Not every guy had my degree of sexual dysfunction, sexual compulsion, sexual addiction, or whatever you want to call it, so that I could think clearly when it came to sex, right? I just been so fixated on sex from about age 9 or 10 until about 10 years ago, that it incredibly disrupted my life, and I made a lot of bad decisions in regard to it. But some people just want to leave aside that minefield, the erotic daydream, the love map, right, that we all have. We're threading our way through a field filled with landmines, and it opens up a lot of things in ourselves that some people would rather keep shut down and closed off, at least until they accomplish certain other things in life. I know that once I started experiencing regular sex, I was kind of off to the races. I lost any sense of good judgment. When people are dating, they go to bed very quickly. They lose objectivity, they lose distance, they lose judgment on their relationship and on their partner.
All the time, it's just too easy. It's overwhelming. You could see anything. You could see a Bosch hellscape on a mainstream porn site that you don't have to pay for. It's just horrible. Anyway, but I guess my point was that he in a way, his audience are these incels, and his ability to acquire an organic audience is what gives him his power. I don't really think it's his hot take ability. Now, Nick Fuentes is not unintelligent. He is actually fairly intelligent. He certainly cares.
So yes, I started collecting porn magazines at about age 16 and porn books, and I'd hide them in the woods. I'd put them, I'd wrap them up so that they wouldn't get damaged by the rain, and I would consult them on my walk home from school.
Charismatic. It's in a way that absolutely doesn't appeal to me, but he's obviously charismatic. He can go and talk on a live stream for 2 hours without stop. Most people can't do that. And
yeah, but what enables you to do that is you just say a lot of crazy things that come to your head, even if they're not reflective of your deeper, more mature, more profound thinking, right? To be able to do that, you just have to be able to toss off observations. You just have to share any random thing that comes to your head. And so people are going to say silly things. in that capacity. All right, The Guardian. Milo Yiannopoulos claims he set up Nick Fuentes' dinner to make Trump's life miserable. And Milo, the right-wing provocateur, says he helped arrange for Nick Fuentes to attend dinner with Trump and Kanye West. So Kanye had an in with Trump. Kanye was already going to visit Trump. Milo arranged it so that Nick Fuentes came along. And Milo says, I wanted to show Trump the kind of talent he's missing out on by allowing his terrible handlers to dictate who he can't hang out with. Well, I think if that was Milo's purpose, the end result is the very opposite of that, right? Trump's team is now going to be much more restrictive about who Trump gets to hang out with. Milo says, I wanted to send a message to Trump. He has systematically, repeatedly neglected, ignored, abused the people who love him the most, the people who put him in office, and that kind of behavior comes back to bite you in the end. Well, this is going to have the effect of making Trump and his team much more careful about dealing with anyone in the alt-right or the alt-light. So Milo told NBC he arranged the meeting just to make Trump's life miserable. He was aware that news of the dinner would leak and that Trump wouldn't hand it at all. Nick Fuentes disputes this. He says, this is not true at all. My intention was not to hurt Trump by attending the dinner. That is fake news. I love Donald Trump. Okay, here's the point. Here's the upshot. Other people will always take advantage of you to the extent that you let them, right? If you have an employer who is paying you $20 an hour and you could get work for $25, $30, $40 an hour elsewhere, that employer will just keep paying you $20 an hour as long as he has to. If he has to raise your salary to keep you, then he'll do it. But otherwise, people will take advantage of you. People will reschedule you at work and not let you know so that you then look bad, or you get calls at 5 a.m. in the morning or 10 o'clock at night. Hey, why aren't you here at work? So other people will impose on you unless you have a strong sense of self. And you can only have a strong sense of self if you fundamentally believe that you're a good person, that you're leading a good, solid life, that you're leading a disciplined life, that you're moving towards your goals. If you feel that, if you're working 40 hours a week, you're a solid, productive worker, you're a solid citizen off work, then when people try to take advantage of you, try to manipulate you, you'll spot it. Now, what's the easiest way to manipulate people? By playing to their vanity. And so Trump thought he would get some news coverage by having dinner with Kanye, but that he could twist it to his advantage, that he could take advantage of the news coverage to keep himself face and center of his likely voters. But Milo Yiannopoulos and Nick Fuentes and Kanye, they outmaneuvered him. So if you're honest with yourself, right, if you're in touch with your own emotions, if you know, oh, I'm going to go to dinner with this disreputable character like Kanye West because I want the media attention. I want to be on the front page, right? If you're honest with yourself, you're going to be much less vulnerable to manipulation. But if you're not honest with yourself, if you don't realize that, hey, you're going to go to a dinner with this disreputable character at a nadir of his career, right, and you're not honest about why you're doing that, then you're much more wide open for being taken advantage of. But if you're honest with your feelings, you're honest with your own motivations, then if something doesn't make sense to you, like Kanye bringing along these people you don't know, then you'll feel that you're being manipulated and you'll be able to act much more effectively. But if you don't believe that you're fair dinkum, if you don't believe that you're a good, solid citizen, if you don't believe that you're leading a righteous life, if you're not in touch with who you are, with your own motivations and feelings, then other people will just go to town on you and they will manipulate you. But if you're living in reality, right, and you know who you are, what motivates you, what you're feeling, much more difficult to take advantage of you. Chat says some of Nick's audience are incensed. However, he seems to go to many groper weddings, often congratulates friends for starting families. Yeah, that rant about dating women is gay. I don't think people should take it as anything more than comedy. It's just the type of thing that you toss off when you're doing 2 hours of live streams a night. So let's have a look here. Let's analyze the Timcast with Kanye West, Nick Fuentes, Milo Yiannopoulos joining Tim Pool.
And then I've suggested that we bring in Nicholas as a enormous extra brain firepower that he is. He's the most extraordinarily brilliant political commentator of his generation, and he's.
Okay, so Milo is insinuating himself here with Nick Fuentes, Nick Fuentes' crowd by saying things that are ridiculous. But a lot of people are incredibly vulnerable to flattery. Right? I have been much of my life. Just I know that thirst for admiration, and that makes you very easy to manipulate. When you recognize that you have an outsized thirst for admiration, and you learn to give yourself the admiration, attention, love that you so yearn for from strangers, then you can stand on your own 2 feet. You're much less susceptible to manipulation.
Being treated just about as badly as anybody, so I thought he deserved to be in the room too. And yeah, that's pretty much how we got together.
So I have some questions about that, but we'll get through the dinner portion of, how exactly this happened, what went down. So this is how you get in contact with the 3 of you. How is it that Nick ends up invited to this dinner, and what happened?
Well, he was rolling with me. I was impressed with Nick, and I was like, just come to the dinner. And we had Karen Giorno pick us up from the airport, and there was a lot of back and forth. There's another gentleman named Jamar Montgomery that was with us. He's an engineer at Boeing, and
I'm telling him we should raise everyone's volume.
Okay, cool. And we sat there, and it was like when Trump came in, I said, do you want to sit alone? He's like, no, bring your friends in. So a big thing is like Trump had no idea who Nick Fuentes was. But this whole, I just got to go right to the heart of this anti-Semite claim that's happening.
Right. That's what Kanye wants to talk about. He doesn't really want to talk about the dinner. He primarily wants to talk about anti-Semitism accusations, and Tim Pool doesn't handle it well.
This is something, if you read the definition, it says you can't claim that there's multiple people inside of banks or in media that are all Jewish, or you're anti.
Obviously, different groups are disproportionately successful in different areas. Blacks are disproportionately successful in many forms of sports and popular entertainment. East Asians are very successful in that they have very solid family lives. They do really well at school. They earn more money per hour than whites. They save more money. They are more law-abiding. They have fewer STDs. Right. So different groups. Jews have areas where they're particularly influential, such as the entertainment industry, the news media, academia, law.
Semitic, and that's the truth. Like, it's the truth. What are we talking about? And
elaborate. What do you mean? You mean?
I'm saying, like, I've been.
So when you're dealing with someone who is as mercurial as Kanye, you don't really want to start cutting him off right there. Right? That's a tactical mistake, because Kanye is the type of bloke who'll explode and just walk out of the interview. So if I was conducting this interview, I wouldn't be cutting Kanye off.
And label anti-Semite, right? So there's different beliefs about our bloodlines, like the documentary that Kyrie posted, and in general, America.
So if that was me conducting the interview, I'd be writing notes down about follow-up questions. But first, you got to get people comfortable. Like, first, you got to get people into the flow, and then you can start hitting them with more challenging questions.
Has been left ignorant, and history has been changed. So when we start questioning things that question the indoctrination, then you immediately get, you said debanked, or what did you say happened to you? Or
demonetized, deplatformed.
Demonized, demonetized. And what's so beautiful about this time is everyone got to see what's really been happening. And now we can really understand. We can see that Ron Emanuel was right next to Obama, and then Jared Kushner was right next to Trump. Ta-da!
But so we're getting right into it, I guess, right? I was hoping to go for the news first before we got into all of this stuff. I think the issue is, one way to put it is
So Tim doesn't need to interrupt here, right? The interview doesn't need his opinion, and Kanye is not interested in his opinion. Most people who you interview are not going to be interested in your opinion, and yet so many interviewers just insist on dropping their opinion where it's not necessary.
Expounding upon a localization issue that you've witnessed, right? Let me clarify. There are a handful of people that you see are Jewish in a certain place, and then you associate Judaism with the power, whereas I view that as.
So he doesn't need to know how you view that, all right? The viewer doesn't need to know how you view that, all right? So this is unnecessary. This is a major tactical blunder here by Tim Pool.
It's not relevant to it. Like, yeah, you're substantially more powerful than I am, but I don't view what you're doing as an issue of black people.
Right? He didn't need to add his opinion. This just interrupts the flow of the guest.
Yeah, but have you ever heard the term the black vote? So it's okay to put us in one net, but it's not okay for me to put them in one.
Yeah, Tim Pool always interrupts. He's not a good interviewer.
One net.
Yeah, but I mean,
that's the basis of the hypocrisy.
So he's just jumping in, and your guest is going to get ticked off.
People have been thinking about and knowing about and realizing for decades. We were all wondering how this dam was going to break. Everybody in the country was wondering what is the root of this hypocrisy? Why can people talk about white people a certain way? Why can't they talk about that group a certain way? And the wretched and wicked and oppressive prevailing orthodoxy of cancel culture. Well, it turned out that the one thing that was going to break the dam was the biggest star in the world, and it took the biggest star in the world to do it. And now the dam is broken.
So let me tell you my issue. I don't like identitarianism. You guys are familiar?
No one cares about Tim Pool's issue. So Tim Pool is trying to make sure that the show doesn't get canceled by YouTube. All right. So I think this is why he is sticking his opinion in here where it's unnecessary.
What that is?
Well, they started it, and they've been visiting on us. We're trying to break it.
When I was asking you about running for president, you immediately said, well, you'd be good for the black vote. And I said, is that because I'm black? No, not just because of that. So is that. Are you doing the same thing?
I didn't say that was the only reason. I said it was because you're personable to the common person, and you probably would do well with the black vote. Absolutely.
Just because I'm black, because a lot of black people don't like me.
Oh, of course. I think race plays a role in a lot of things. Absolutely. And I think that's for.
I think the construct of race has really been forced upon us as just something for us to be woke about and just constantly talk about and use it as these like walls.
Could you say the same thing about Judaism?
Well,
so Tim just keeps interrupting. It ticks people off. People don't like this, right? Not just Kanye. You have a guest, an ordinary guest, right? He would be annoyed and ticked off. When you're annoyed and ticked off, your world just kind of narrows, and you're going to be much, much less appealing and compelling as a guest because you're just ticked off.
Well, let's look at the facts of what I'm saying, though. If you say in this neighborhood where they gerrymander, there's this amount of time. So, hey, I wasn't doing that. I was just gerrymandering the lawyers and the Hollywood executives and the people at the bank that debanked me and then froze my accounts. It's like we want to jump into protecting the idea that we can't put a net around something, right? But that's been my job as a producer to take, a Roy Ayers sample and put a James Brown drum and put it within a 2-minute, 3-minute song. That's the way I actually think, and that's the way I talk. And now this morning, I found out that they were trying to put me in prison because what they did was I moved $140 million into JP Morgan. And I said, I want to talk to Jamie Dimon. Like, look at me. I'm just going in naive, multi-billionaire, like maybe Jamie Dimon will let me in on some deal flow. Wrong. And I'm just like banging my hands like, I want to meet with Jamie. And I start complaining online, and then they debank me for complaining. And so I'm about to get debanked. They're like, you need to go to Trump's, the bank, AXO, whatever, you got to go. And I'm like, I've been trying to buy my own bank for the longest. And then we figured out how to get my own bank. It's like 50 million, 75 million. So I'm about to buy my own bank. But then as they're about to take the money out, here comes Adidas with a $275 million bill for marketing funds that they agreed upon. Because I said to them, hey, I'm the marketing, give me the marketing fund, which proves by the response they got when they, stole the designs and said, we're going to not call them Yeezys anymore. So this is what I was already fighting Adidas for. So I'm fighting Gap, get out of Gap, fighting Adidas. And then I deal with this little bit of noise from, Zionism from the fashion world where they use this plant named Gabby, who's obviously like some kind of CIA agent, knows nothing about fashion. This is a certain thing. When someone can't dress, that they're not like a fashion person. They're just there as like the society, like the control that they try to use with celebrities, which has now been broken, right? Because where it broke. And okay, I want to get on like LeBron in a second, but I'm going to come back to this and just talk about this morning where I'm not going to mention her name because she's a nice lady, but someone at Cohen Resnick tells me, and I tell all of my finance people never use the term a lot, but they said, okay, you're gonna have to pay a lot of taxes. And that made me feel like they're just like waiting, like we finally got him. We finally can put him in jail. And I was like, can I still run for president in jail? I found out because I was like, okay, that's fine then. It'll be okay.
But if you were Jeffrey Epstein, they wouldn't touch your bank account. They would allow you to break the rules, regulations, just like JP Morgan and Chase did, just like Deutsche Bank did. So there is an issue to bring up with that. But when it comes to the race stuff, I think this is an important discussion to have because I think
I have to complete this thought. You guys got to.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, because I'm talking about literally finding out that they were trying to put me in prison this morning. Watch this. So
this morning.
Okay, so yeah, all these guys are interrupting, and it doesn't help the show. It doesn't help the interview. It doesn't help the viewer. It's just Tim Pool and this Luke guy indulging themselves at the expense of the viewer.
Yes. So not come to my house this morning, but I found out. Okay, so they put a $75 million hold on 4 of my accounts, and then they said you owe a lot of taxes. Took me like 6 hours to find out how much a lot was. They said, well, around $50 million. Now I'm going to different CFOs like, okay, so would this be tax evasion? Because I'm obviously not the most financially literate person on the planet. I was just a child, basically. Like when you become famous, you stop growing at that point. I became famous at age 24 and I had handlers around. I had my mom around, different things. And it was always like you go from one handler to the next handler to the next handler. So now I get to actually learn how to run a company. I get to learn how to count. Really, I was like Pablo in a movie. It was like I didn't even know where to put the money, like literally making $300 million cash, but you're just like a high priced, we're not going to use the S word just because it's like too passe to use it. But it's like next year I was supposed to make $500 million in royalties. And like no one needs this amount of money. But when I would work on homeless shelters and ideas, I'd have a contractor, we won't say what race, and they'd be tearing down the contracts. It's all about, position. It's not about the amount of money that you have. And, to come in here, I feel like it's a setup to be like defending. I'm not going to go through another, I'm literally going to walk the F off the show if I'm sitting up here.
Okay, he's about to lose the guest. So maybe stop interrupting and stop giving your opinion.
Having to, talk about, you can't say that it was Jewish people that did it when every sensible person knows that. I mean, Jon Stewart knows what happened to me and they took it too far. It was like American History X. Like my head was on the side of the curve and the exact people that I called out kicked my head. We found out that my
right. If you just let this guy rant, it's comedy gold, right? It's revealing, entertaining, compelling, just letting this guy rant.
trainer was a MK Ultra Canadian intelligence.
He worked in the defense research and development in the Canadian military, essentially working on PSYOPs in the Canadian military. This is Harley Pasternak.
Yeah, what I'm saying is, look, they tried to medicate me. I was exhausted. They wrongly diagnosed me. And they when I asked them, how much lithium did you want to put me on exactly? It took them 4 days to answer because they were embarrassed about the amount, right? And I refused to take this, right? You understand that if I had taken the medication, I would not be here and it would have been, he was deeply troubled. We miss him. We love his music, though.
Well, they would have Britney Spears too. I mean, look,
they would have Michael Jackson.
Or worse, yeah.
So
look what they did. Look what they did to Britney. When she went in, she was tired, she was exhausted, she was in a bad way. But 10 years of that medication wrecked her brain. You can see it now. You can see there's not much of her left.
You mentioned Pasternak was the name?
Yes, Harley Pasternak. That's the text message that you posted that we were talking about before.
Here's the lobotomy.
So Tim Pool and this Luke Rudkowski guy, they want a conversation. But a good interview and a good show is not a conversation. It's a performance. And you stand back when you have a high-profile guest and you let the guest shine.
Yeah. Before the show, obviously, I'm getting a bunch of messages from people. People are hitting me up and they're like, you shouldn't host them. They're anti-Semitic. They're white supremacists. They're racist. I do find it funny or weird, whatever, that, Nick, they call you white supremacist. You're here working with or for, one of the most powerful black men, one of the wealthiest and most famous. But a lot of people are saying on the right specifically, don't platform them. And I said, well, I want to understand what they're thinking and why they're thinking it. They're involved in what may be the biggest news story of the past week. And we have an opportunity to sit down and talk
because the red media controls both sides. It just said it as simple as possible. Jared Kushner was next to Trump. Ron Emanuel was next to Obama. But since 1940, go ahead.
I was going to say, isn't that an issue of these individuals? Like you're.
See, he keeps interrupting him. Right, you can see why Kanye is getting ticked off.
I'm going to order with the last of my money that's available in a different account. I'm going to order a PJ before I sit and have another Lex Friedman setup conversation. When I'm literally they're trying to put me in jail for my opinion. But I'm not going to have that opinion. I don't care about people. Those are bots that are trying to tell you. We realize. Look at Pence. He sold Trump out. You know what I'm saying? It's like I would have never wanted to do anything that hurt Trump. I'm on Trump's side. Trump said things that hurt me. He lied about me, but I mean, he's known for lying. And when people used to tell me that, he's a liar, it's like, I went into the trenches for Trump. That's another conversation. There was no one in my position that wore that hat. And all of my surroundings exhausted me. It was like death by 1,000 questions. I know I'm jumping to another thing. Yeah. But what I'm saying is, I know you got a rep for your people online, but it's you got a person in real life that I'm not with it, bro. I lost the money for the freedom of speech. And that's what makes me the only American that we know that really deserves to run the country, because everyone else, your boy DeSantis, Trump, whoever they raising a petri dish over on the Democrat side is going to play the game. Okay,
this is Kanye just about to storm off the set. Let's see what Tucker Carlson has to say.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson. Tonight we're going to start with a quiz. What do you have when you find Sam Bankman-Fried, Janet Yellen, and President Zelensky of Ukraine all together in one room? A federal grand jury proceeding? That would be a good guess. Sam Bankman-Fried seems to have committed the biggest financial fraud in history. As the chair of the Federal Reserve, Janet Yellen bears direct responsibility for the destruction of the entire U.S. economy. President Zelensky, meanwhile, sits atop a money laundering scheme so brazen that Democrats won't even allow it to be audited. So yes, these are three people who could badly use a federal investigation, but they're not getting one. Instead, they're being celebrated, held up as uniquely fascinating people by the New York Times. In case you missed it, today was the annual Deal Book Summit. That's a money-making event the newspaper advertises as a symposium with, quote, top business leaders. Tickets went for $2,500 apiece. Sam Bankman-Fried, Janet Yellen, and Volodymyr Zelensky were all there, apparently in their capacity as top business leaders. Thank you so very much, exclaimed the moderator, Andrew Ross Sorkin, when Sam Bankman-Fried finished speaking. Thank you, Sam Bankman-Fried, everybody! And with that, the audience applauded heartily. New York Times readers were clearly impressed by the Democratic mega-donor Sam Bankman-Fried, who also happens to be one of the most prolific thieves of all time. But whatever, he seemed like a nice kid. It was a pretty amazing display. But what's most interesting about an event like this is not what it tells us about the guests. At some point, history will render its judgment about them, but what it tells us about the people who invited the guests. If it's okay to treat Sam Bankman-Fried like just another naughty celebrity, Sam Bankman-Fried, everybody, applause, applause, applause. If you can do that, then who's off limits? Who's beyond the pale? Well, as it happens, the New York Times has spent the last few days telling us, delivering yet another hyperventilating lecture about who we're allowed to associate with and who we must avoid at all costs. And it really depends on political loyalty. Some people, the New York Times has explained, have views that are so reprehensible, these people are physically off limits. You cannot be in the same room with people like that. You can't talk to them. You can't ask them questions. Their opinions are like smallpox, communicable and deadly. These are the thought criminals, and thought crimes are the only crimes that matter. Other crimes, not such a big deal. Murder and rape and carjacking, nah. As the New York Times has often told us, people who do those things are the victims of your racism, so they deserve compassion. So, by the way, do good liberals who stray outside the lines. Good liberals can always be forgiven, even when the things they've done are objectively very, very bad, like tanking the U.S. economy, or stealing billions from investors and using it to buy Bahamian real estate, or bringing the entire world to the brink of nuclear war and getting rich while you do it. Liberals can still do these things, and you can still heartily applaud them because in the end, you know their hearts are in the right place. They believe the right things. So with that in mind, it probably is not a surprise that no one at the New York Times bothered to ask Zelensky today where exactly all the money has gone. No one demanded an accounting of the billions of your tax dollars that seem to have disappeared into the pockets of Ukrainian oligarchs in tracksuits, because asking would have been rude. He was our guest. So instead, the New York Times gave Zelensky an opportunity to demand much more of your money, which of course he promptly took. Here's part of it.
On November 15th, the Biden administration submitted a new aid request of $37.7 billion, which, if passed, would bring the total amount that the U.S. Has provided in assistance to $105.5 billion. We're going to be speaking with former Vice President Mike Pence a little bit later, and there has been a sentiment among Republicans who now control the House in the United States from Kevin McCarthy, who've said there should not be a blank check. What do you tell them?
We are absolutely open, and we are thankful for the assistance. It's not quite correct to speak about 100 billion as a value of the war for the United States. The value is lives of people. If Ukraine does not stand through this war, the war will spread into other territories and maybe even to other continents. For, our people is the biggest value. Tell me how much our people cost. I don't know.
Okay. So support me or Putin's going to invade Atlanta. And by the way, you have no choice, because if you object to sending billions more to the very people who gave a no-show job to Hunter Biden, you're a bad person. You don't care about Ukrainian lives. You're a moral monster. Now, moral blackmail this crude does not typically work because nobody with self-respect would stand for it. What? Settle down, son. Get the Germans to pay for it. It's their continent. That's what a normal person would say, someone who had self-respect. Unfortunately for the rest of us, Congressman Michael McCall of Texas has no self-respect, so he folded immediately. And that matters because McCall is the top Republican on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. So just in case that you imagined that throwing out Nancy Pelosi and electing a Republican Congress, a huge victory, would mean that somebody would push back against Joe Biden's lunatic and completely anti-American foreign policy priorities, oh, you were mistaken. Because Michael McCall just informed us that because we're good people, and so is Zelensky, we're going to be sending Mr. Zelensky and his pals in tracksuits billions more of your money. Watch.
And I want to pick up where Colonel Milburn left off. He believes that there should be longer range weapons sent to Ukraine. Would you approve of that?
100%. He's absolutely correct. I mean, my criticism of this administration was before the invasion, we wouldn't put weapons in. And since the invasion, we've slow-walked this process. We are going to provide more oversight, transparency, and accountability. We're not going to write a blank check. Does that diminish our will to help the Ukraine people fight? No, but we're going to do it in a responsible way. And I think it's very important that the American people understand what's at stake here.
So the U.S. military, not Ukraine's military, our military, the one that's supposed to protect our country, is running out of equipment and manpower. But just so we're all clear about what Michael McCall's priorities are, we're sending advanced weapon systems, yet more of them, to Ukraine. And that's in addition to what we've already sent, which is bigger than the entire Russian military budget. So if that's not insulting enough, and of course the point of this is to insult you and to degrade you and to make you fully aware that your country's interests come last because you come last on the list of priorities, they're going farther than that. We've also decided to pay Ukraine's energy bills. Now, it's kind of odd that we're doing that at a time when we have our first real energy crisis since the mid-1970s. A manufactured crisis, but a crisis nevertheless. A crisis that is causing Americans to freeze in their homes because they can't afford heating oil. That means it's a perfect time to send energy to our friends in Ukraine and the whole region. Here's Tony Blinken.
I announced that the United States will commit over $53 million to send equipment to help stabilize Ukraine's energy grid and keep Ukraine's power and electricity running. We've also submitted a request to Congress for $1.1 billion to secure Ukraine and Moldova's energy sector and restore their energy supply.
So why is this continuing when, of course, Joe Biden could call Zelensky, who effectively works for him, I mean, close family connections there, of course, his son worked in Ukraine, could call Zelensky and say, no mas. Get the money from Europe, or let's wrap this thing up. People are dying. The rebuilding costs of this country are beyond what we can pay. This is really a dead end. Let's come to a settlement. And of course, that could happen in about a week if they wanted it to. But they don't want that. They want the war to keep going. Why is that? Because everyone's getting rich. And so the one thing you're not allowed to say is that, hey, maybe we should stop this war because, of course, the cash spigot would stop flowing. And that's why at the Deal Book Summit, the top business leader, Zelensky, in fact, he is really a top business leader if you want to be honest about it, went after Elon Musk because Elon Musk suggested maybe we should get a peace deal. Here he is.
It seems that Elon began to change his opinion, and we began to hear all kinds of appeals. I don't know if somebody is making an influence on him or he is making those choices himself. I always say very openly, if you want to understand what Russia has done here, come to Ukraine and you will see this with your own eyes without any extra words. And after that, you will tell us how to end this war, who started it, and when we can end it.
Oh, all perfectly reasonable. Can't have peace, send more billions. So what's interesting is that this last few days has been like the few days before that. There's been a lot of moral outrage in Washington about bad ideas. And of course, some ideas are bad on both sides, for sure. But ideas aren't criminal. Actions are criminal. And as always, the real criminals are getting away with it and getting richer in the process. Pedro Gonzalez noticed all of this. Thank heaven, he's an editor at Chronicles. He joins us tonight. So, Pedro, I have no idea who you voted for. I assume you voted Republican, and a lot of people did, with the hope that someone would put the brakes on a foreign policy that clearly doesn't help the United States. In fact, hurts the United States and degrades the United States. And now we learn that it's full speed ahead. How did that happen?
Yeah. Well, Tucker, thanks for having me. That's a good question. It's one that Ronna McDaniel seems like she wants to figure out, which we presume is why she just formed a new GOP advisory council to inform the direction of the Republican Party. Right now, as you noted, that direction looks like helping Biden line the pockets of defense contractors and overseeing a massive wealth transfer from struggling Americans to one of the most...
Okay, so some good points there in that Tucker Carlson segment. Number one, we've been focused for the past week on how awful it is that Donald Trump had dinner with Kanye West and Nick Fuentes, but the New York Times gets to host Sam Bankman-Fried at an event. Is Nick Fuentes really more evil a person than Sam Bankman-Fried? So, yeah, the New York Times wants to tell us like who we're permitted to talk to and not talk to while they host an event featuring Sam Bankman-Fried. And then Zelensky, leader of Ukraine. It's not that important. It's the situation that's the boss there. It's the situation that's important because it's the situation that could very well give rise to a nuclear war. And John Mearsheimer, political scientist at the University of Chicago, says that if Russia set off a nuclear weapon in Ukraine, he thinks the most likely US response is not to retaliate with nuclear weapons, not to retaliate with conventional weapons, but to push for a ceasefire. So, of course, the US might respond with weapons and we might get an escalation so that it's Russia versus NATO. We would edge closer and closer to the nuclear precipice. But Mearsheimer speculates that Russia setting off a nuclear weapon in Ukraine, which they'd only do if they felt like they were fighting for their own survival, that would finally convince the United States that there needed to be a ceasefire and an end to this war. So the US has had many opportunities to back away from the precipice of a war with Russia since 2008, and the US has consistently walked closer and closer to the precipice of nuclear war. And as John Mearsheimer says, we have a non-trivial chance of a nuclear war with Russia, which could very well mean the end of life as we know it.
At the New York Times Deal Book Summit a few hours ago was a top business leader. Can't overstate how weird it was. At one point, Andrew Sorkin from the New York Times, who promoted Sam Bankman-Fried on television at length in previous months and years, asked how customers could learn to be safe online, as if Sam Bankman-Fried just didn't rip off his own customers. But the main takeaway from the whole thing is that Sam Bankman-Fried isn't stupid. He knows he's bulletproof. He knows the Democratic Party and the SEC and his friend Gary Gensler won't touch him. So watch Sam Bankman-Fried explain that actually he's not very worried about criminal charges.
How concerned are you about criminal liability at this point?
So I don't think that, I mean, obviously I don't personally think that I have, but I think the real answer is that's not, it sounds weird to say, but I think the real answer is that's not what I'm focusing on. I mean, look, I've had a bad month. This has not been a fun month for me, but that's not what matters here.
I've had a bad month. It's all about me and my personal journey, but being held accountable by regulators, the Justice Department, the U.S. Congress, these are my friends. I paid for them. Boy, if there's ever been a clear window into the deep corruption we really need to get rid of if we're going to return to representative democracy, it's that right there. So Sam Bankman-Fried seems so confident that he's untouchable that he admitted in public to commingling funds between FTX, his crypto exchange, and a separate company he controlled. That's the kind of thing that regulators would normally care about, but in this case, for some reason, didn't. Watch.
FTX didn't have bank accounts. It didn't have any bank accounts globally. We were trying to get them. It took us a while, took us a few years. And there are customers who wanted to wire money to FTX. And so I think in the meantime, some of them were wiring money to Alameda Research to get credited on FTX. And I think that was a substantial sum. And I think that the FTX's internal accounting did correctly, effectively try to debit Alameda for those funds.
The New York Times is not a TV show, it's a newspaper. And when they want to find out about somebody, we can speak from firsthand experience, they put a whole bunch of reporters on the story for months. And they may interview the person they're writing about. They also interview a lot of other people, and they create a full account of what they claimed happened. They're not doing that with this guy. They're bringing him on to allow him to whitewash what he did. But aware that he may have had a bad week, as he just said, Bankman-Fried tried to do some damage control. Watch this.
Was there commingling of funds? That's what it appears like. It appears like there's been a genuine commingling of the funds that are of FTX customers that were not supposed to be commingled with your separate firm.
I didn't knowingly commingle funds. I wasn't trying to commingle funds.
Vivek Ramaswamy is the founder and executive chairman of Strive Asset Management and deeply familiar with the world of finance. He joins us tonight. Vivek, thanks so much for coming on. So what was lacking, I felt, in all of this was the moral outrage you would associate with someone who apparently stole billions from retirement funds. But the New York Times treated him like, yeah, you know, maybe he got a little, you know, you did some bad things or whatever. But there's no like, it's not like he's Donald Trump or something, right? Like, what is that?
You know, the thing that was striking about this, Tucker, is it actually reminded me of a lot of what we saw in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, where you had firms that, again, positioned themselves like they wanted to be the good guys, the Goldman Sachses, the Morgan Stanleys. And in fact, the difference back then was that they even got bailed out by the government directly at the public fisc. Now, here in the case of SBF, this is a guy who wore T-shirt and shorts. And the thing that was fascinating for me for watching that, Tucker, today wasn't so much SBF. He's really good at deflection, using a lot of technocratic language to deflect accountability. The thing that was actually interesting was looking at the people in the audience, nervously laughing, distancing themselves from him. And to me, when I was thinking about what happened in 2008, Tucker, I think the interesting part of this is the people in that audience, the other financial elites who now are trying to distance themselves from the guy who wore a T-shirt and shorts, actually are not all that different from him in kind. They may be different in degree, but not in kind. And I think that's the thing that people actually struggle with this SBF story if they're in elite finance. When they look themselves in the mirror and look at the kinds of things that happened in 2008, you know what? It's an uncomfortable parallel and an uncomfortable similarity. And in a certain sense, he's just one of them and they're just one of him. That was one of my takeaways from actually watching today.
Well, that's the deepest truth of this whole thing. That's exactly right.
Okay, so the chat says Sam Bankman-Fried obviously doesn't have a lawyer. His parents are both professors at Stanford Law School. His father works for FTX. His father says that they're going to spend all their available cash defending Sam Bankman-Fried against possible criminal charges. This is his father 3 months ago speaking on the FTX podcast.
I hear a lot when speaking to teams that need legal help is they seem to run into a lot of trouble because they have a hard time finding like the right type of lawyer to work with them. They have a hard time really knowing what they need to do. So they end up in a lot of exploration, which is very expensive rather than like execution. I was curious if you had any tips for companies, young companies that need legal help on how.
Yeah, that's Joe Bankman, Stanford Law professor. Barbara Fried is Sam Bankman-Fried's mother, both Stanford Law professors. Jim Bowden in the chat. Jim, I went past your neighborhood yesterday. I took the ferry to Parramatta, and I almost texted you to wave as I was taking the ferry by. So Jim says, Luke, would you agree that Sam Bankman-Fried is one of those valued, untouchable Jews beyond criticism? Well, you followed any news report, Sam Bankman-Fried is far from beyond criticism. Now, there was a New York Times article that went easy on him, but Sam Bankman-Fried has been, I think, the most criticized man in the world the past month. So if that's beyond criticism, I don't think so. I should check in on Tim Pool in real life. There's the chat. Okay, so Zelensky's not important, all right? It's just the structure of the situation that means that we risk World War III. Right, I played a little bit there of Joe Bankman being interviewed. He's Sam Bankman-Fried's father. Let's get to, this is where Kanye walks.
Here's what I was trying to get to. You went right into the anti-Semite thing. I think it's something that should be talked about, but if you start bringing this up, you're going to ask my opinion on it. I'm going to disagree with you.
He's not asking your opinion. Tim keeps interrupting, keeps interjecting with his opinion, and it's not asked for, not by the viewer. I
didn't ask your opinion on it. You jump into it. But I don't care about your opinion. I like your opinion on how we win an election, but I don't care about anybody's opinion, bro. I lost. They tried to put me in jail. They blocked $2 billion I had. Like I told Farrakhan, I said, look, is it anti-Semitic for me to say his name out loud? Like I told
minister.
Yeah, the minister. Like I told
Obama met with him too.
Oh, he was. Yeah, I mean the Jewish people allowed Obama to meet with the minister. You know, so. Farrakhan said, well, did he have the money? The contract for the next 4 years, if I hadn't done anything, would have been $500 million a year for 4 years. What I was fighting for was the IP, so my children could, I'm sorry, just sometimes I think about 7 thoughts at one time, because anything I see, I come up with like 7 answers to it and then just choose what it is. But the thing is, when I said my children, the reason why my brain kind of blocked, because it's like God is saying, your children are going to be okay. Baby mama's got money, right? God is using me. He's breaking me down, removing all of the, richest person.
Yeah, his children are going to be okay because what matters is, do they have money? And Kim Kardashian has money, so the kids are going to be okay. All right, parents having money is just one factor in whether or not your kids turn out okay. The most important factor is their genetics. But I would think that having a mother who releases a sex tape to become famous would probably take quite a toll on the kids, even if she's rich.
All of this, so I can serve him. And the more and more those things are taken away from me, the more I can be empty and be a vessel and be able to be used. And right now, it's like, you're not going to take, if we can't, you're not going to take my pain away, right? The Jewish people say, it's the Holocaust, this happened, and you can't say anything about it. We can't take their pain away. No one's going to denounce the fact that they tried to lock me up. That's what, because every time I'm just holding stride, and it's like, I thought I was more Malcolm X, but I find out I'm more MLK, because as I'm getting hosed.
They tried to lock me up. Well, probably to whatever extent that you're in legal danger or in danger of being locked up. I'm going to venture is 99% because of your own choices, not because of something that they are trying to do to you.
Down every day by the press, and financially I'm just standing there. And when I found out that they tried to put me in jail, it was like a dog was biting my arm, and I almost shed a tear, almost, but I still walked in stride through it. Yeah.
I think they've been extremely unfair to you.
Who is they though? We can't say they is
press. I'm not using I don't use the word as the way I guess you guys use. I'm talking
it is
about
them though, isn't it? I mean, because
no.
because when you think about it, consider it. In 2018.
What do you mean it's not?
What do I mean? Like, okay, so how about you leaving?
Are you referring to the press?
He's gone. I'll say it right now. You guys want to bring that stuff up? And
have the discussion.
Not have a conversation.
Have the discussion.
Like you think he's going to come in here and say, "Here's my pain, here's my suffering." I'm going to say, "I hear you," and then he's going to say, "And it was Jewish people," and I'm going to be like, "Okay, but don't you consider?" I'm not going to do this. I refuse.
Make sure he's cool.
All right, go for it. Luke and I will have a conversation. So.
Yeah, Tim, you're repeatedly interrupting him. You are interjecting with your own opinion where it's unnecessary. He could have done a lot better as a host.
Right, so we'll get
and before we do, I want to point out, yes, you're welcome, Michael Malice show. I don't know, YouTube. And do you run it through any portals on your website or anything at this point?
No, just it's on YouTube. It's on Spotify. It's on Rumble. It's on Odyssey.
I was on an episode. If you guys haven't seen it, it was excellent. Michael's a great interviewer.
It was a lot of fun.
Very fun. And I haven't seen you since then. So
that's true.
Good to see you, buddy. You look good.
Thank you.
Yeah, we got Serge hanging out.
Hey, low energy Serge Duprio. What's up, everybody? How you doing, YouTube? Take it away, Tim.
Let's talk about
the worst by far is Serge. Very weak, very low energy.
Okay, so this was streamed 23 hours ago.
I do want to mention one quick thing too. I had a phone call with Google today. They're panicking over Section 230 reform. So the Supreme Court has agreed to take up a case pertaining to recommendations, and so YouTube is now actively lobbying prominent creators. I suppose I got an email and it asked me to sign up for a certain date to talk to their head of policy. It was very nice, but I was personally offended at the things that he was saying. So I'm not trying to be mean to the guy. We're going to talk again probably tomorrow. But it seemed like they were trying to lobby me to agree that YouTube should have the right to be politically biased and be immune from defamation, which I absolutely do not. So we'll talk about that too, but we got to get
Oh, as though it's important that Tim is offended. Right. Saying I'm offended, that's like a girl move. I can't believe any guy would try to make that an argument. I'm offended. I mean, I had that done to me the other day. I'm offended because I was making jokes about Lover's Lane. Who cares if you're offended? I'm 56 years of age. I've never been offended by anyone's opinion, anyone's political perspective, religious belief. It doesn't offend me. Like, what kind of namby-pamby wimp gets offended
into this
by
stuff? So
these
here's the first
things?
story. Yep. Many of you may have seen what happened last night on this show, and I have concerns that we had Ye, Fuentes, and Milo on the show. A lot of people messaged me beforehand saying, "Why are you having them on? What they're using you? They have an agenda." And this is
Who's
funny.
they?
Paul
Pelosi
No, listen. They say they as in general.
Arrived. Watch. After a knock and announce, the front door was opened by Mr. Pelosi. The 82-year-old did not immediately declare an emergency or tried to leave his home, but instead began walking several feet back into the foyer toward the assailant and away from police.
But the very same details have been reported by NBC's local affiliate in San Francisco. And local NBC sources tell Fox Digital they believe Miguel Almaguer and the affiliate had different sources that offered the very same information. Remember, Almaguer didn't just write a very controversial story and have it edited without the brass at NBC signing off on it. Doesn't work like that. Somebody approved the story, and likely several people approved it. And just as likely, several people have now signed off on saying nothing. Tucker.
That is true. Spoken like a man who knows television. The great Trace Gallagher, available for a full hour on Fox News at night, midnight, every night, Eastern Time. So, of all professional sports, the NHL, hockey probably has the most conservative fan base. And owners. More than 75% of National Hockey League owners donate to Republicans. Phil Anschutz, for example, who's legitimately conservative, owns the LA Kings. He's a mega donor to the Republican Party. So it's a little weird, or maybe it's not weird at all, that the NHL has decided to push woke propaganda on its fans. And boy, is it. Gary Bettman, the commissioner of the NHL, and league vice president Kim Davis now say they want fewer white people playing hockey.
Looking at the hockey landscape in 5 years, what does progress look like to both of you? Commissioner Bettman.
To me, progress looks like that we become more reflective of the communities in which our teams play, that there are more Black players of both sexes, players of color of both sexes, and that we are more diverse than we've been.
And there's 5 years from now, I want hockey to be on the lips of boys and girls of color, just the way, soccer and basketball and baseball is on their lips, something that they see as accessible.
So, attacking white people. Okay, I guess it's kind of common. You don't really notice it. It's totally immoral, by the way, but it happens a lot. And then they're getting even more esoteric. This is an actual tweet from the league, the NHL. Quote, trans women are women, trans men are men, non-binary identity is real. None of which is true, all of which is insane, but they just stated it like fact. So Theo Fleury is a hockey legend in Canada and the United States. He played in the league for a very long time, most of his life.
Okay, comment in the chat. Can you go sculling in Sydney Harbour? I've never seen that. Maybe you can. Comment in the chat. Have I read the book by Roger Ailes, You Are the Message? Yes, I have read it, and some parts of it are very powerful. So Roger Ailes knew a thing or two.
General people messaging me. They're using you, Tim. They're using you. And I said, for all of them, why do you think people come on this show? Do you think they're coming on because they love me and they want to hold my hand and smile and look at my face? Or do you think they're trying to promote a book? Do you think they're trying to get a message out? They're trying to promote their Twitter accounts. They have ideas they want to share. Of course, everyone's using everybody. I have guests on so we can make an interesting show. It's our business. They come on because it's an opportunity for them to share or sell or whatever.
I thought we were friends.
Think again. We're only having you on because you make us laugh.
Okay. I guess I'm a clown.
So I got up, I woke up about 3:15 this morning and turned on the Australia versus Denmark game. So Denmark's about the 10th ranked soccer team in the world. Australia is about the 35th ranked soccer team in the world. Australia won 1-0, unbelievable breakaway goal. So Denmark had 3 times as much possession of the ball as Australia, but Australia won. Australia is through to the knockout round. The United States is through to the knockout round. Mexico is not going through to the knockout round. So yes, I'm absolutely loving the World Cup. Go Australia, go America.
So here's what I want to say, because right now there's a lot of stories. Trump is being told that he's got to denounce these guys. There was a story that popped up on Fox 5. Kanye West spotted in Frederick after storming off of podcast. Here's the potential scenario, to be fair. The scenario is they abruptly left the show. They were on it. Ye didn't like that I was not agreeing with him or that I was pushing back in any capacity, got up and stormed off. Milo and Nick, working for Ye, wouldn't stick around and left. Immediately, they called a charter company to schedule a private plane who was they were very lucky that a hot crew, they're on the ground ready to go, was available nearby and was able to then dispatch a plane to Frederick.
So it's really important to Tim to try to make the argument that this walkout was staged. I don't think it was. Tim doesn't want to look at his own mistakes, his own problems as an interviewer, his own unnecessary interjections of his own opinions, his own unnecessary interruptions of a big-time guest. Tim doesn't want to look at his responsibility for that interview going south. He would rather focus on, this was all staged. I don't think it was staged.
That they could then get into within a couple hours' notice. Entirely possible. My personal opinion, that sounds really, really crazy if that's the case. So when they stormed off the show, my first thought was that, okay, he stormed off the show. Then we talked about it, and I said it was the perfect thing to do if you want to generate press. There's a story going around that Donald Trump met with Nick Fuentes, an anti-Semite white supremacist. That was all last week. First thing this week, we have the show, and I think it was the first thing Nick said on the show was that something about isn't it really them? And then immediately Ye gets up and walks out downstairs, smile on his face, eating cookies. Apparently, one of our guys here said that when they were leaving, he said something like, "I came to the show, got what I needed, now I'm done, I'm leaving." And so that made me wonder about what was the goal. It's possible, maybe I'm just thinking too much into it, that Milo wanted revenge on Trump. Milo was quoted as saying he invited Nick because he knew Trump would mishandle it in the press. He wanted to make Trump's life miserable. Trump is mishandling it in the press. The first thing out of, I believe it was the first thing out of Nick's mouth was, "But isn't it them?" And then Ye leaves right around the half an hour mark when we're at 100,000 concurrent viewers. And that said to me, they had to have planned this. Then I saw the video of them going to the Frederick airport, boarding what appears to be a super mid private jet right after the show, within a few hours. And I was like, how did they charter a private jet that fast? It is entirely possible they did. I know where the jet originated. We did some sleuthing to figure it out. What happened was about a half an hour's flight time away, a hot crew, this is what I'm told. It is entirely possible. These are by the experts in the private aviation. A hot crew was available. I'm sorry. What they said was a plane nearby flew to Frederick, landed for about an hour, and then departed with them. It is entirely possible that they happened upon what's called a hot crew. That's what they said, meaning there were people on the ground working, ready to take off, but for no reason. The plane was not being used. Ye is a very powerful, wealthy individual. Perhaps he knows somebody and someone has his back. It's interesting considering everything he's been saying about how they're trying to arrest him and shut him down and silence him and censor him. But apparently he was able to get, within 2 hours notice, a super mid private jet to fly from here to Los Angeles with a crew active. I don't know what happened, but to me it sounds staged. It sounded like they knew in advance they'd be leaving. At least Ye may have.
That's not the vibe I got. I got that they seemed very genuine when they were here. I know Milo. I mean, he's a zany dude, but like he's looking for redemption. That's his path right now. And Kanye's grasping at straws to try and find someone to help him. And Nick was so kind the entire time he was here. Like I've heard stuff about him. I've seen him say stuff online out of context that's racist. But when you see him eyes to eyes, like the guy is looking for friends. Like he doesn't probably lived in an environment where he didn't have a lot of friends. So what happened was you and Kanye were going back and forth and kind of interrupting each other. You mentioned at one point, Tim, you were holding your finger up, indicating you want to jump in, and he was like, oh, and he's like, you want to say something, go for it.
Before the show.
Yeah, and even
so as soon as the show started, his demeanor changed.
So you guys were kind of had an agreement, like we're going to kind of talk over each other, we're going to flow. But then when Nick chimed in and you interrupted Nick, Kanye's face dropped, and then he got out. He was like, you crossed the line. When you interrupt me, that's okay. You interrupt Nick, I'm out.
Before the show, when we're doing pre-show and setting up, it was so different. Kanye said, he said a few things. I pushed back, and he just had a smile on his face, and he's like nodding along like whatever. The show comes on. And all of a sudden, he's like, we went to Trump's dinner. I was invited first. I called Milo. So anyway, let's talk about anti-Semitism. And I'm like, whoa. Like, we were just talking before the show.
You know what happened? The first article.
He knew what the article was. We had the article pulled up pre-show. He mentioned Pence. He asked Fuentes about Pence and what Trump. I said, we'll use this story to launch the dinner and the controversy caused by it. And I'll ask you about how this dinner came to be. What do you think about it? What happened with it? And then what is Ye 24? And I was like, who am I kidding? We're going to get into the anti-Semitism stuff. I'm going to push back. Here's how it'll play out. Like, if you guys want to say something, I'm going to put my hand up and let you know. I'm going to talk about this. And they're like, of course, no problem. Absolutely.
Tim's like, I didn't do nothing. Tim Paul, I didn't do nothing. I didn't do nothing. Nothing to do with me. Kanye storms off the set. It has nothing to do with me. You did a bad job as a host, as a moderator, as an interviewer. You did a bad job for the viewer. You did a bad job for the guest. You did a bad job, Tim. But he has zero interest in looking at his own part in this disaster.
Totally fine. And then as soon as the show started, all of a sudden it was like, oh, how dare you bring up this article? Oh my.
Here's what I don't understand about that dinner that doesn't make sense to me. You do not get a +3 to meet with the president. I don't care who you are. That is not. Piers Morgan had a piece today that he won The Apprentice. He was, I think, the first winner of Celebrity Apprentice. He was interviewing Trump at Mar-a-Lago. The Secret Service, basically gives you an anal swab before you're going to meet a former president, especially if you're dealing at Mar-a-Lago, which not that long ago was raided because there were concerns about things that are classified or whatever top.
Trump does all sorts of things that normal presidents and ex-presidents don't do. So it's not shocking to me that Nick Fuentes might have bypassed normal security protocols.
Secret, so on and so forth. I don't understand how, if you're running for president and this is the scenario in your home, you're going to have dinner with anyone, and be like, oh yeah, bring your buddies, and not be paranoid, even just for security reasons. Who are these people? Are they spies? Are they so on and so forth? I don't understand that.
We struggle with this here when we're bringing people in. We have to send this big long-winded email about who's allowed here, what this means, vetted by you, stuff like that. Now, I wouldn't say it's like we're that strict where we...
But you're not the president.
Exactly.
You're not a former president. It absolutely beggars belief. And the other thing is, like, Cenk Uygur had a tweet about, like, this isn't a surprise. This is who Trump hangs out with, white supremacists. It's like, when someone's the president, you know exactly who they're hanging out with. You know every minute of their day, what they're having for dinner, and so on and so forth. It's not a big secret. Their schedule is very public and very known, and it's a very big deal. This is the president of the United States, in this case, the former president of the United States. So what Trump is saying does not cut ice with me. And what else is crazier to me, in all seriousness, his daughter converted to Judaism, right? So this is something that obviously, and I think one of his other kids married a Jewish woman. So the joke is, like, what's the difference between a New York Times reader and Donald Trump? Donald Trump's grandchildren are going to be Jewish. It's like, if he has this in his family, for him to be like, well, oops, I didn't know, that's just confusing.
It's not confusing that you'd have lunch or dinner with someone who said some anti-Jewish things. I assure you, half of Jews have said negative things about Jews. Right? It's not like Nick Fuentes is this extraordinary creature just completely unrecognizable from the rest of the human condition. Right? People say negative things about blacks, about Christians, about Jews, about Muslims. Right? Nick Fuentes and his anti-Semitism aren't unusual. Right? People say negative things about our groups all the time.
I think he just trusted Kanye and was like, if you want to bring whoever.
But why would you trust? But he just. I think first of all, he has this boner for celebrities that is really demented, because that explains why he's endorsing.
Yes, I think this point by Malice is a stronger one.
Dr. Oz, who believed Justice Smollett, who was for trans kid surgeries, who had the whole laundry list of, like, very lefty ideas. Herschel Walker, who's just a football star for Senate. Like, the love affair Donald Trump has for people who are blue checks is demented.
I think Ian's right about one thing. That's this guy's looking for friends. I can't speak to the things that any of them have said in the past. Like, what I should say is, like, obviously they've said deplorable things, testable things. But what I genuinely believe is, we had Milo on this show a couple weeks ago, and he talked about supporting Trump. He talked about vengeance. He wasn't talking about this stuff. His focus was different. Then he gets involved with
Milo is not the most stable character. Kanye West, not the most stable character. Nick Fuentes, he's been fairly stable.
Yay, brings in Fuentes, and all of a sudden this is like a particular component of his career, his personality. What I think happens is when you cancel people, they go in the only direction they can.
Wait, I'm going to disagree because I have receipts from Milo.
That is a good point. The more you cancel people, the more likely they are to go off in extreme directions.
Well, because when this all came out, I wrote a book about this. There's a chapter about Milo in my book, and then you write, I think Milo is very, very charming. He's very, very witty. He's certainly very intelligent. And of all the people who got canceled, the reason he got canceled, I think, was one of the more BS reasons. He was the victim of childhood abuse. He spoke out about it in a kind of tongue-in-cheek manner. I don't begrudge anyone.
And I think this is good analysis to hear from Malice, Michael Malice. That's a fair
One who suffered through something like that, how they should deal with the situation. And he was basically saying things like, okay, this is something that he was kind of rationalizing. Like, I'm glad this happened to me at a young age, as opposed to being like, holy crap, I got my innocence taken from me at a time when it shouldn't have. So I think the fact that he was just like, get out, like everything's ruined for you because.
Okay, let's look at a clip here. Gavin McInnes, Anthony.
And there's no
Nick
taking that
Fuentes.
back. That's what it is. You could argue till you blow in the face, but there's never any taking back what the Proud Boys are and what they are now.
Yeah, I don't.
What they're perceived as.
Right. So I think the guys that just, especially in Britain, the guys that they go, our meetings are secret anyway. I don't care what you have heard. Like, we know what they've heard about the Masons and all that other stuff.
Right.
So go ahead, talk.
Yeah.
And if I'm not rallying, I'm not getting arrested, so you'll never know who I am and go fuck yourself.
Yeah.
You can think that I meet with Trump every day, but I don't care.
I have to assume like the fact that I'm, I do a show with you, what I've said in my own shit, and the fact that I broadcast on Cozy, especially now, like everything Nick does now.
Dude, he's trending every day.
He is huge right now.
Trending #1 today. Yesterday, the top trend was Kanye, and I think the bottom, which it only shows you like 6 or 7.
Yeah.
The bottom one was Milo.
Yeah.
And I texted Milo, I'm like, dude, you're the top and the bottom trending subject. And he goes, this dead naming is getting ridiculous.
Oh, no.
It's not Kanye West.
That's
It's
funny.
Ye. And I'm not Milo anymore. I'm Low.
Low? Oh, that's great. Yeah. We were having a little text discussion about that whole thing and whether, because people have asked me, would you have them on?
Duh.
And in a second, I would. I actually, E-Rock, come on in here. E-Rock. Oh, yeah, E-Rock's not here. If E-Rock was here, I would say to him, reach out to Milo. Reach out to.
Are you getting like everyone you ever known to go, you should ask Ye if he wants to do an interview? I'm like, what an idea.
Yeah. I haven't thought of that.
Wow.
I haven't thought of that.
Hey, you should get the Rolling Stones to play your birthday party. You love Satisfaction. You like Jumpin' Jack Flash. You love all their songs. Have them come to your house and do a show. Hey, you've spoken to Tucker twice. You should get on his show. You should get back on. You should go back on Joe Rogan. I'll get a 21-year-old emailing me. You should go back on Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
Well, you're hired.
I think.
Mr. Ideas.
That's an idea guy. That's someone who's thinking outside the box. Yeah,
idea.
I should do that. No shit. So yeah, E-Rock. Because we obviously Nick and Milo, we both know them very well. Ye. Not very familiar.
We're not best friends. I wouldn't say best friends.
I wouldn't say besties, but we've all spoken with Nick and Milo in between, and they would have complete free access.
Okay, what about this? Hi, I'm Ye. I will come on your show.
Yeah.
You can't say anything.
Okay.
I don't want to hear you talk
at all.
You can do like and what do you think of that?
I like a good
But I don't want you to interrupt me or push back on anything I say.
Okay.
And I'm going to deny the Holocaust. I'm going to talk about Jews controlling the media.
Right.
I'm going to go DEFCON 3 on the Jews
DEFCON
for
3.
2 hours.
Okay.
Do you want it or not?
What time?
I'm inclined to. You know what you could do with that is you could do it, right? And then at the beginning, you say, I'm about to show an interview. It's going to get me canceled. Here's how I feel about the subject, but our deal with...
Here's what everyone that you're even saying that for is saying. Right. Why would you even say it, Gavin? Why would you even say that knowing that you're trying to preface it? Who are you trying to please by saying, hey, by the way, the only reason I'm saying...
But you're not apologizing. You're saying, here's my view.
But who are you even trying to appease by saying, hey, I just want to let you know, we're going to have him on, but his opinion, and whatever you're going to say, no one cares. You're a piece of shit. I'm a piece of shit. He's a piece of shit. That's how they see it. And no amount of prefacing is going to change how anyone feels about you putting Ye on your show. Ain't going to change it.
Well, obviously everyone wants him on the show, but so then the problem is people just can use me.
It's nitroglycerin that you're fucking juggling. Everyone wants to see someone juggle nitro. Why? Because they're juggling it? No, they want to see you drop it and explode. Because that's exactly what people want to see when they have Ye on their shows.
I'm not worried about being canceled. I can't be any more canceled than I am.
We're all as canceled as we can be.
Unbelievably canceled. My fucking cousins are
Crazy
canceled. My accountant is canceled. My architect is canceled. But I just don't like the idea of I don't have the right to speak on a subject on my own show.
Okay.
I don't like that you can walk into my house, say whatever you want, and I don't get my 2 cents. I would never say like, that's bullshit, and you're a fucking piece of shit and interrupt you and all that. But I think I'm good enough at doing interviews to say, I get what you're saying, but what about blah, blah, blah.
Okay. Have you seen him say anything that you would have to refute based on your own ideology, or the fact that you want to let the audience know that you don't agree with him with certain things? Would you feel so strongly that you'd be like, hey, I need to say this how I feel about it?
Yeah. I do have that one thing.
Give me an example.
Yes, Jews are wildly overrepresented in the media. They're 2% of the population. They're 80% of the media. Yes, the majority of the media is out to destroy America. But my 2 cents is that liberal elites, liberal white elites are out to destroy America. Jews are overrepresented in that group because Jews have high IQs. Jews are overrepresented in medicine. They're overrepresented in math. They're overrepresented in a lot of high IQ things because that culture has put a lot of emphasis on education.
Dare you call them smart? You're like Hitler.
But like Palestinians, for example, have the exact opposite values. Their thing is like, is he strong?
Right.
Strong man. Like intellect, knowing the Quran, they couldn't give less of a shit.
Yeah, more of a...
In Judaism, like studying the Torah all day is a very noble pursuit. They're like old-fashioned Catholics in that.
Discipline and intellect and
being strong and fighting.
Sure.
Don't do it.
No.
But my Jewish neighbor the other day,
beat up and sue.
I was getting a weight set, and I was like, he goes, "You gonna put it in the garage or in your house?" I go, "I think I'll put it in the garage so I can drop the weights and stuff." And he goes, "Okay, well you have to get someone installed because you're Julian." And I was like, "I'll just put it in." And he goes, "Oh, we're Jews. We don't do that.
Oh,
we have guys who do that." And this guy's like, he works out. He's a bodybuilder. But he's like, "I don't screw things into cement. I don't know how to do that." Because that culture is like, I don't handle that kind of stuff.
When he took it off the truck, I'd go, wait. Wait. Got it.
And I might also throw out a lot of the people you're talking about are women. I'm an anti-Femite.
Yeah.
And maybe your problem is that too. So I might slightly muddy the waters with that interjection, but I don't like the idea of someone comes on my show and I have to be their bitch and just sit there.
No, I hear you. I hear that.
I'm not going to say, you should be ashamed of yourself.
Now, do you think your rebuttals or retorts or...
They wouldn't even be that. They'd be questions.
I know, questions. Do you think he'd lose his mind and leave?
Well, that's the art form, right?
But you can do anything you want. But if you want to keep a guest around who is unstable and edgy, then maybe just hold your opinion back for a while. Maybe just sit back for a while. Maybe minimize interruptions. What's most important to you, Gavin, is it most important that you feel not like a bitch, right? If you're able to have self-respect, you're not going to worry about feeling like a bitch because you're allowing a guest to talk. Right? What's most important to you here? Your psychological needs or what is good for the show? What's most important to you? Your feelings of whether or not you're a bitch or the viewer experience?
Yeah. Based on what you've seen.
That's
now my opinion.
I don't think so.
Of what he talks about, because he's not talking about these subtleties and like, yeah, elites also run the media and Hollywood. It's mostly, if not, it's vastly Jews that run the media, the entertainment business. Now, whether that's good or bad, I'm not even fucking saying that. I'm just saying this is a fact. Go to IMDb and look up producers of movies.
But Jews don't deny that.
No, some of them do. Or
that's just dumb.
Wait. They might not. No,
that's why he walked off at Tim Pool.
Hold on,
because Tim Pool denied that Jews dominate the media, and that's just dumb.
Now wait, they might not deny it, but they take offense to anyone even bringing it up. That's the fucked up thing. Yes, the dumb ones say no. We are the majority.
So yeah, Anthony Cumia making a lot of great points here.
Of people that run the entertainment, the banking industry, media, but you can't mention it. There are plenty of people.
That's dumb.
That, by the way, pointing it out is anti-Semitic.
Right. No, what intelligent Jews do, and that's the majority, is say, yes, we dominate the media, we dominate Hollywood.
Where are these Jews?
Well, I can show you a million articles where the headline, I think it was in the fucking Atlantic.
If they bring it up,
it was like,
okay.
It was
You
like,
can't bring it up.
Jews don't run Hollywood. Give me a break. Or come on. It was an article like that. Very popular about 5 years ago.
But
and he said, I could only find 5 major players in Hollywood who were non-Jewish. 4 of them wouldn't speak to me for fear of being ostracized.
The other one's getting his dick sucked in the jacuzzi.
No, he goes, and the 5th one turned out to actually be Jewish after all.
Oh!
But those guys admit it, but the intelligent ones go, yeah, I know we dominate that, but we're not a monolith planning to ruin anything and destroy white people or something. So it would be like saying, yes, Russians dominate chess, but we don't have this plan to do anything evil.
No.
That's not me saying that. That's
the
intelligent
I get that.
Jewish argument.
But you cannot possibly tell me that you haven't come across people that get offended by you just pointing that out.
I have no time for that. I don't care.
But it's a thing, and it's a bad thing. They could label you an anti-Semite for just saying.
That's a dumb thing, and it's bad for Jews. It's bad for Jews to be that intolerant.
I don't think it's that. I don't think it's that scarce of a say that happens that you can just say it like, 1 or 2 might.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. I'm saying dumb Jews deny that they dominate the media in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Smart Jews go, yes, obviously, but we're not out here to.
Right. Now, my other point is, if as Kanye was talking about his banking being pulled, his ability to make money, his ability to move money around, and this is at one time anyway, a billionaire. You look at that and go, if 1 or 2 Jewish people are upset or offended with Kanye, they can't deny him banking, one or two people. Yeah. It's a concerted effort that need be done by a group of people that are offended by what he's saying. And that's an amazing base of power. To be able to pull his ability to do business, that isn't one or two. Like, oh, they're individuals, just individuals. It's not this big conglomerate or
yeah, but it's liberal elite whites who happen to be mostly Jewish. If
liberal, a Karen has the say at Bank of America and Citibank?
Yeah. A lot of the top
I think it's Karen Blurg,
female.
Karenberg or Karen Schwitz.
Sure.
Has the say.
But if Kanye went out there and said, I'm going DEFCON 3 on the Jews tomorrow, sorry, on the gays tomorrow, and he talked about gay groomers and gay pedophiles, which he does, but if he made that his main thing, you'd see the same kind of cancellation because liberal white elites hate anti-Semitism and they hate homophobia.
Yeah, I understand you'd see the same cancellation because he's going after a liberal fucking icon, gays or whatever. But it always has to filter. How do people stop a citizen from banking? Who has to make? Who has to push the button? Who has to sign off on it? I think you'll notice in that signature, who's signing off on these things, and it's a concerted effort. And it doesn't have to be this conspiratorial thing where they meet in a conference room that no one knows about. It's just known. There's a brethren. There's a cabal.
Look, when you're outside of polite society, these things happen. I've never had a bank account canceled on me. I assume you've never had a bank account canceled on you. But a lot of people in the porn industry have bank accounts frozen, or banks have told them, we don't want you anymore. People big in crypto have also experienced this. Once you get outside polite society, then banking, which tends to be historically a very conservative institution, right, may not want you as a customer. So it's not that shocking. It's not something that just happens to those who criticize Jews. I know a lot of people in the porn industry, when I was writing on the porn industry for 10 years, they would complain about, I think, Bank of America and other banks telling them, we don't want your business.
It's liberal white elites who are massively disproportionately Jewish. And I would go further and say these Jews are not real Jews in the sense that they tend to be secular atheists. Orthodox Jews, Hasidic Jews are my people. They're pro-Trump. They breed like rats, by the way, bad analogy. They breed like rabbits. These secular Jews are just like liberal elites in that they don't really breed. They're not going to be around in a few generations. They're extinguishing themselves.
Right.
And they don't read the Torah. They don't go to a temple. They will occasionally go to synagogue to socialize, but they're not real. They call themselves like female rabbis. If you're a female rabbi, you're not Jewish. It's not how it works. It's
like that shit.
It's like a female Muslim cleric, or their mothers will be non-Jewish, but their dad's Jewish, and they're like, I'm a Jew. No, if your mom's not Jewish, you're not Jewish. Karl Marx, George Soros was a second-generation atheist. You can't not believe in God for 2 generations and still call yourself a Jew. Sorry.
So you don't think Soros is a Jew?
No.
So he's just
a white man. He's a liberal globalist elite, and he wants to destroy the world. And his
Look, your Jewish status is not affected by whether you believe or don't believe in God. All right. So you can have a liberal religious practice, such as female rabbis. You can not believe in God. You can eat, non-kosher food. Right. This doesn't make you any less Jewish. Jewish is primarily a tribal identity. It's not primarily a religious thing. Right. It's a tribal identity with a religious component.
grandfather may have been Jewish. Or the head of the New York Times.
Do you think he has any influence?
He's not Jewish.
Do you think he has any influence in the Jewish, I'm not even going to say community. It's not community.
It's not a community. The seculars hate the Orthodox and the Hasidics.
But you don't think he has influence when he does something or says something or puts down a fucking
He has massive influence on liberal elite America.
Who happens to what? Be
disproportionately Jewish.
You know what, though? The number of Jews in this country are very small.
2%, 3%.
So the liberal elites have their agenda.
Yeah.
But who's the power broker of that agenda? Who are the ones that are able to do what the liberal elites need be done? Cancel people's bank accounts, blackball them from Hollywood, have the media rip them the fuck apart.
I don't know. Have you ever been ostracized? If you've ever been ostracized, you'll notice that it tends to spread. Right? You get ostracized from one group, other people quickly find out about it. I mean, that's my life experience.
That part of the whole thing? Does any...
It doesn't require someone on top deciding these things. We pick up social cues about who is cool and who's not cool, who it's good to hang out with, who it's not good to hang out with. We read social cues.
Fucking liberal Karen or douchebag that you see walking down the street with the blue hair or nose ring, are they the ones that are able to go, yeah, shut his fucking bank account down? Or is it a concerted effort, again, by the people that actually have the ability to do these things?
The people who have these abilities are liberal white elites.
I can't believe I'm more
astronomically.
I'm more based than
they
Gavin.
Astronomically.
I am more based.
Okay, let's get back to a little Richard Spencer here.
He can, and so he does have talent. Look, I always want to be
Talk
fair
about
to
Nick.
people, try to see them accurately, and not just get into e-drama and bashing and whatever. But he developed an audience, which is this online youngish audience, and even many of them are even younger than we might imagine. I mean, there are I a huge lot of his audience are teenagers. Andrew Anglin actually said this so many of my readers are 16. There was actually one guy, I forgot what happened. There was some Nick fanboy that I don't even know. I think he was like planning a school shooting or something. I cannot remember exactly what happened, but it was very bad. And this kid was like 9 in 2016 or something. I mean, it's crazy. But anyway, he developed that audience, and that's his power. I mean, as I've said before with Stop the Steal, it wasn't just Nick himself. It was the fact that there were many conservative institutions and activists that have money and have an institution, but don't actually have an audience. No one ultimately gives a shit about Women for America First or something like that. No one's heard of them. No one cares about them. When you listen to the administrators talk on television, they're boring as hell. They have no real audience. There's no compelling factor to any of them. But they are organizations with funding. They see a benefit to themselves with promoting election misinformation.
So you noticed that Elon Musk really is unbanning a whole lot of accounts, a lot of people coming back on Twitter. Here is Michael Malice.
This is you got me triggered. Now I'm going to go full Luke. Elon Musk, Eliza Blue, if you're out there, I think she's been on the show.
Yeah.
This has been her big issue, getting a CP off of Twitter. God bless her. This is something that is unambiguously a problem, something unambiguously horrific and evil, period, end of story. And a lot of times people who were in as you said, were in these images or videos would contact Twitter, and Twitter shrugged their hands. Elon Musk took over and he's like, all right, this is going to be like priority one. Like, this is a complete non-starter. This has got to go. We can worry about racism, homophobia, transphobia, gender pronouns, whatever. This is a problem. Forbes, who is an agent of the devil, wrote a tweet and an article that says, Elon Musk has tried to take on Twitter's child abuse nightmare, but according to experts, has only made it worse. And they tweeted it 9 times. I looked up how often Forbes had mentioned Twitter and children in the past. They've literally never even used those 2 words together previously. So now that Elon is trying to do something about it, Forbes has an issue with it because they don't have an issue with it. They have an issue with Elon Musk. So this speaks.
So remember, Richard Spencer about a month ago said that he didn't think that Elon Musk would make any significant changes with Twitter. Twitter would just go on as it has. Musk would make 0 difference. Richard Spencer couldn't be more wrong. We've got thousands of unbanned accounts coming back online. Elon Musk is cutting way back on the disgusting child sexualization that used to populate Twitter. Elon Musk seems to be doing a lot of really good things on Twitter. He's made a significant difference.
And protesting the counting of the votes, et cetera. And so they see Nick as powerful in that way. And I have no doubt that the conservative movement is well aware of Nick, and that they know that he, for better and for worse, is kind of part of their general structure. Because these things act like, as I've said before, they act like multi-level marketing platforms. So in other words, you have a downstream channel. So like if you're selling doTERRA essential oil products, doTERRA is ultimately the manufacturer. And let's say that you live in Utah and you're a avid Mormon. Well, you're going to have a downstream audience of people who will maybe meet at your house on Sunday afternoon or something, and you can tell them about doTERRA. But the money flows to you, but it ultimately flows up to doTERRA. But you create a downstream channel. There could also be some hippie commune in Portland that is a downstream channel of doTERRA. So they have nothing in common with the Mormons channel. But
so Rich is trying to make the case here that the GOP has made millions of dollars off of Nick Fuentes and his movement. I just don't see that. How exactly is the GOP profited from Nick Fuentes? Like, Nick Fuentes is taking people, attention, and money that would have previously gone to GOP operations. Who's the Charlie Kirk, all right? Nick Fuentes is taking people away from the Charlie Kirk movement. I don't see exactly how the GOP is profiting off of Nick Fuentes.
Again, the money flows. The spice must flow, as they said in David Lynch's Dune. Like, the money must flow upwards in this multi-level marketing.
And Ricardo is back. He says, I don't see how Nick Fuentes is really threatening to normies. He's babyface. Well, you can have a babyface and be threatening, but I don't see how Nick Fuentes is threatening. I don't see how Kanye West is threatening. I don't think Nick Fuentes or Kanye West or Milo Yiannopoulos pose any danger to the safety of Jews, the prosperity of Jews, the happiness of Jews, the power of Jews, the influence of Jews in America. All right, these guys are not a threat. Ricardo says, Judaism is a religion where we worship your genes. You don't need to believe in God, just be a hereditary elite. It's not primarily a religion, it's a tribe, or tribes operate this way, right? Tribes don't tend to demand that to be a member of your tribe, you have to believe in X, Y, Z. That's not the nature of tribal identity. Religions demand that you believe this or that to be a member of the religion. But Judaism is primarily a tribal identity with a religious component that a minority of Jews participate in.
Fashion. And you can be a part of that if you're ultimately pushing in the direction of the corporation. And so, like Nick, yes, he engages in Holocaust denial. Yes, he thinks that women should be barefoot in the kitchen. Yes, he thinks that we should have a Catholic dictatorship. Yes, he thinks that abortionists should be put on trial, or whatever he thinks. And that's not something that any kind of mainstream Republican would ever endorse. But they ultimately understood him as a powerful downstream channel. So, you know, Nick got a lot of super chats, made thousands of dollars. But whatever thousand.
Looking on Twitter right now, Darren Grimes says, for the first time ever, Christians are a minority in Britain. So 46% of Britons identify as Christian versus 59% in 2011. And Sophie Elman Golan says, why is this sad news? Yeah. How dare you want to be a majority in your own country, right? If you think that being a minority is tough, right, then why would you want to be a minority? I think most people understand that being a minority is not as fun as being a part of a majority. So yeah, wanting to be the majority in your own country seems pretty healthy to me.
He made personally, I would say ultimately thousands, and in fact, maybe even millions went into the GOP coffers. He's not like taking money away from the GOP.
How exactly is Nick Fuentes putting thousands, millions of dollars into GOP coffers? I don't see this.
He's in fact creating a kind of downstream channel that leads to Trump and the GOP. And in that sense, he is, you know, a necessary evil, or a I don't know the right word, an embarrassment, but a profitable embarrassment. They recognize what he's doing and the fact that he's successful at it. And so I think they're very well aware of him. I doubt actually Trump was knowledgeable of him personally, but there are certainly people there that understand what he's doing. So where was I in this? So, I mean, this brings up interesting questions about like what the ultimate motivation is for Yeism, et cetera. But this is the point I was making, and then I'll move on. The point I was making was that regardless of what Nick's own kind of, sexuality is, however you want to describe it, don't want to think about it too much. The fact is he had to kind of say that nonsense, like having sex with women is gay, or it's all gay. He had to do that to appeal to them, to develop that downstream, highly profitable network. And so it's a kind of like, it's a double-edged sword. Like Nick wouldn't be a public figure without his ability to get 10,000 views almost immediately by just turning on his computer and talking. At the same time, to develop that downstream channel, you ultimately have to kind of delegitimize yourself. You're going to ultimately have to not just be a Catholic dictator.
No, you don't have to delegitimize yourself. You have to give people what they want. You have to provide assurance for people. You have to be a source of emotional comfort to people. You have to be a source of emotional strength to people. You need to be able to articulate things that people feel but are unable to articulate. No, you don't have to give up yourself.
Leadership advocate, but ultimately be this rather creepy and ultimately ridiculous incel. And I think the most powerful attack on him, again, the most powerful attack on the alt-right is...
Ricardo says, what are the explanations for why all the distant right types are ad hominem attacking Kanye West and friends? Well, there are a lot of reasons to not like Kanye West. Right? One doesn't have to have any particular view on Kanye West to to think, oh, don't really like this guy. So, I mean, Kanye West is a bizarre person. So Kanye West wanted to tour Australia. No way. The Australian Football League does not want anything to do with Kanye West.
Was ridicule and not, these guys are Darth Vader. The most powerful attack on Nick is, this is just some kid who can't get laid.
And Ricardo says, LOL, Luke, I know why you don't like him. We'll talk about the rest of the closet anti-Semites or supposed anti-Semites. That's because Kanye West is not an appealing personality. He's unstable. He's frequently unhinged, off the hook, antisocial. Like, who would want to hitch their bandwagon to Kanye West? I mean, would you want a Kanye West type checking the engines before the plane takes off? Would you want a Kanye West type as a neighbor?
And I think they're going to pursue that. But anyway, what do you guys think about this? I have a couple other kind of angles on this.
Backers. I really think that there was something, an intent to smear him, and that Milo is the point man there. It seems pretty obvious.
Yes. And, you know, conspiracies work best when they're already, like, there's already motivation in play. You know, like, to create something whole cloth, you know, to say, like, I'm just coming up with something totally ridiculous here.
So Ricardo says, I'd rather live next to Kanye West than Joseph Carter. I would rather live next to Joseph Carter than Kanye West. But one thing, unexpected loud noise, I experience it as an assault. It really seems to diminish my well-being. Also, Kanye West is likely to bring over a lot of people who have a much higher propensity for crime than Joseph Carter's friends. So the unexpected loud noise, the crowd that would accompany a Kanye West's own volatile, unhinged behavior. Yeah, I would not want Kanye as a neighbor.
You know, we're gonna put a dead hooker in Trump's, you know, Chevrolet trunk or something like that. Well, you're just inventing some scandal like totally out of whole cloth, and you might get caught doing that. It might not work. It might blow up in your face. It might be misunderstood. You know, yes, that would be kind of dealing a death blow to Trump, but there's just so much kind of risk. People might not even buy it. You know, I probably wouldn't. It's like, what? That just seems, you know, it doesn't make sense. This totally makes sense because you're basically like channeling existing dynamics that are already in play. Milo is a sociopathic con artist, and but he's one of a particular kind. He'll kind of sense where there is some kind of energy, and he'll right-wing, edgy energy that is scandalous and outrageous, and he'll just go there like a moth to a flame. So if you look at his history, it's Gamergate. You know, I'm going to be the man about Gamergate. One of the scandals was when he created this foundation for like whites. It was like White Student Foundation or something like that.
The Privilege Grant.
The Privilege Grants or whatever they were called. That was a total scam. The degree to which any like white heterosexual male received funding from that is highly dubious. At the very least, it was just an obvious thing. And so he's kind of going to that thing. He went to the alt-right. I think a lot of these people see now that it's the Christian nationalism and so on. So at first he presented himself as I'm gay.
Examples of Kanye West's unhinged behavior. So I just went to Wikipedia. He said that George Bush doesn't care about black people. Kanye said he'd go down as the voice of this generation. When he interrupted Taylor Swift, like took the microphone away from her. He's storming out of auditoriums after not winning a music award. I felt like I was definitely robbed. I was the best new artist this year in 2004. If Kanye doesn't win, then essentially the awards are fixed. November 7, 2006, Kanye West apologizes for his public outbursts. 2006, when his Touch the Sky failed to win Best Video at MTV Europe Music Awards, Kanye West went onto the stage as the award was being presented to someone else and argued that he should have won the award instead. 2007, he said his race has something to do with his being overlooked for opening the 2007 MTV Awards in favor of Britney Spears. Lost all 5 awards he was not nominated for. and then said he would never return to MTV because he didn't win any awards. So when Taylor Swift was accepting her award for Best Female Video, Kanye West goes on stage, grabs the microphone from her, proclaims that Beyonce should have won the award. He was subsequently removed from the remainder of the show for his actions. So, yeah, a lot of unhinged behavior. 2013, he said why Barack Obama had problems pushing his policies in Washington. Black people don't have the same level of connections as Jewish people. We ain't Jewish. We don't get family that got money like that. Well, maybe if it's true that black people don't have the same level of connections as Jewish people, then maybe black people need to work on developing connections. So October 7th, Kanye West suggested in a post on Instagram that rapper Puff Daddy is controlled by Jews.
And therefore I can't be attacked by the left, and so I'm going to be your champion. I'm going to do all the Trumpism, the anti-immigration stuff, blah, blah, blah. Then he kind of realized that that was over. That kind of ran its course. And so it's now Christian nationalism. So now I'm an ex-gay. I'm creating a foundation to pray the gay away for gays. And I'm a Catholic. I'm doing all this stuff. All of this, you know, if you see these things, there are these Telegram posts that get promoted that are just, they're authentic posts from Milo, but they're just too outrageous to really be taken seriously. You know, Trump, there was one that I saw making the rounds. Trump, he's a tool of the Jews, and we actually need a candidate who is based on the Bible or something like this. And so it's anti-Semitic, but then, you know, Christian fundamentalist or whatever the hell it is. So he just always is, he's attracted to that most, you know, that like shiny object, like hot flame. And he goes there and
sounds like Richard Spencer to me. I mean, Richard Spencer does it at a higher IQ level. So I've been looking at the news and I noticed that 100% of the China experts who I see quoted in the news say there's absolutely no chance that these COVID protests will pose a threat to the reign of the Chinese Communist Party. And it reminds me of the 1980s, when it seemed like none of the experts on the Soviet Union thought that the Soviet Union was in danger of collapse. And then suddenly the Soviet Union collapsed overnight, even though none of the experts of which I'm aware predicted it. Now we hear all the China experts say absolutely no chance that China falls apart. Well, I think there's a very good chance that China could fall apart tomorrow. But I don't think the Chinese Communist Party is going to be ruling over the nation state that we currently know as China in 10 years. So I would put the over-under for the survival of China as its current political state with the Chinese Communist Party running the way. So I'd put the over-under at, say, 8 years. So yeah, I think it's entirely possible that this may be the beginning of the end of the Chinese Communist Party. I do expect China to fall apart any day now. And probably wondering, 40, what does Peter Zion have to say about this?
From Colorado. I hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving, and I hope it kicked off a fantastic holiday season for everyone. Holiday, Christmas, Hanukkah, ones, whatever you call it, whatever makes you happy. Just that's somebody else's culture war issue. Today, we're going to talk about something significantly more significant, sure, and that is the end of China, which is moving out of the realm of the theoretical and the historic into the here and now. What's going on right now is there are protests involving thousands of people against the government that are at least nominally about COVID restrictions. Now, ostensibly, there have been two triggers for these sort of mass, semi-coordinated protests. The first was a fire that occurred in the western city of Urumqi that killed people who were under COVID quarantine. According to Chinese laws, when it comes to quarantine, people can't move, and it doesn't matter if your building's on fire.
And chat says, you aren't actually betting with money. That's right. I don't bet with my own money because I'm a gambling addict. But I'm betting my reputation. I'm betting my ability to discern what's going on in the world around me. You wouldn't come here to check out this show if you didn't think that I occasionally at least have some insights that are worth thinking about, even if you just come here, you reject everything I say, but you just find it sharpens your own thinking to go up against someone who you see as wrong all the time. But probably think that I have some occasional insight into the world. And yeah, I do think that China's falling apart in front of our eyes.
And it also meant that the fire service couldn't get into the building to do battle with the fire. Anyway, it's policy in China to weld people into their homes and their buildings when they're under quarantine, so toss in a fire and shrug. Second, the World Cup. China is an information state, and part of that means that the state lies to you about anything it finds inconvenient, like the fact that most of the world has found a way to move on from COVID. Well, the World Cup's live broadcast showed tens of thousands of cheering and booing fans without masks, and well, folks got cheesed off. So we now have protests in every major city. The overall number is at least in the high tens of thousands of people participating, and it's difficult to know more detail than that because it's an information state. China is a bit of a black box for policy because China is a one-man state, but that one-man state is becoming overwhelmed with non-compliance. And the government just doesn't have the bandwidth to come up with policies that most people would consider normal, but I think the best word we can use here is creative. One person only has so much bandwidth. And so we're seeing institutional freezing and breakdown. Because this isn't the United States where a bunch of suburban housewives descend a maskless on a food court and start yelling, "Let's go, Brandon," or a few yahoos glue themselves to a museum wall. We can obviously get through crap like that, but it isn't clear that...
And Harold makes a great point. I come here for the curated content played at 2x speed, not the commentary. That's a good point. Like often, I may think that my commentary is just so valuable that I have some important insights that, maybe I have a compelling personality, maybe I'm funny or entertaining, or I have depth or wisdom. But no, I curate a ton of content. So it is entirely possible that you don't give a fig for anything I say. You just want me to play curated content. I absolutely believe you. I absolutely believe you that there's a substantial part of my audience that does not give a fig for what I have to say. They come for the curated content.
China can. It has to do with a different structure. The United States has different levels of authority: local, state, national, legislative, judicial, executive, neighborhood, business, academic, and so on. Independently garnered, constitutionally garnered, community created, overlapping, sometimes clashing, often messy. But interests generate power, generates authority, generates durability, not in China. China is a one-man state because it is nearly the only way that China can exist. This isn't Sweden or Denmark or France or Argentina or Korea, where the bulk of economic and political power exists in one city, so it's easy to come to a degree of consensus. China's population is spread out on...
So I rarely play at 2x, so this is at 1.5x. So let me know if you think this is too fast. So I normally play at about 1.5x.
A huge swath of territory comprising everything from near Arctic to fully tropical, and regional disparities abound as you would expect. But this also is in the United States, where our definition of inequality means that the average person in Maryland is about twice as wealthy as an average person in West Virginia. China's regional...
Harold Williams says, I give you a ton of credit for radicalizing E. Michael Jones. Yeah, I turned E. Michael Jones onto the Jewish question with your pod reporting. In a butterfly effect kind of way, it radicalized me at Hale 40. Then E. Michael James radicalized Kanye West. I'm responsible for Black Hitler. Mighty Puck says, you have good takes, but your China takes is more like a hunch. Yeah, it's a hunch. Luke is the 8x12 card of acceptable right-wing Overton window. Yeah, I pull my punches. I try to stay in the good graces of wider society. I try to comport with what will work with the rest of my life. I don't try to fit the rest of my life around my live streaming. I try to fit my live streaming around the rest of my life. Most of my friends are at synagogue, and I'm not going to burn up my friends and cause myself unnecessary trouble. Surus.
Disparities are a 10-to-1 span. Nor is this a country like Germany or the US or Japan or India or Indonesia, where geography was kind enough to enable physical integration via either waterways or easily maintained road and rail networks. And so where you have integration, you have commonality. You've never had that in China. The North China Plain is its own region. The Yangtze Basin is an industrial powerhouse with few connections to the north. And the cities of the southern coast have all...
Well, I think the Han Chinese as an ethnic group, don't they compose about 92% of China? So, gosh, that sounds like some social cohesion and connection right there.
Looked abroad for their welfare, their safety, and even their food. The only way to make China work is to force it to. And these many disconnects show up in Chinese institutions. The Chinese Constitution...
Now, I think he may be right. It's a little bit like Iraq. We removed the strongman Saddam Hussein dictator. And right now, Iraq seems to be functioning, but I don't think any of us would be surprised if Iraq descended into some massive civil war that cost millions of lives. So too with China. If we have the end of the Chinese Communist Party, it wouldn't be shocking to me if we reverted to Chinese civil war that caused the loss of tens of millions of lives. Would you be surprised if that happens? Like some places can only be governed by a strongman dictatorship. Maybe Iraq, maybe China.
The Constitution is a joke. It isn't even referenced by Chinese courts. There's no rule of law. There is law.
Maybe Russia. Maybe Russia only works as a strongman dictator at the top. also situations. Dwight Eisenhower said that the United States would only survive a nuclear war if it had a dictatorship. The United States could not survive a nuclear war as a democracy. So in different situations, any nation state is going to need a dictatorship to survive. Normal times, some peoples are better cut out for participatory democracy than other peoples.
Law by rule, and that rule is whatever Xi, the chairman, says. And he is a horrible delegator, even within the Chinese Communist Party. The COVID restrictions in play right
Was this guy, Peter Zion, formerly in the State Department, or is he just a guru? He is a guru. He started off working for George Friedman, so doing geostrategic analysis. So he started getting quoted in the media around 2004. Now, I have some disagreements with Peter Zion. A few days ago, he called Putin's war on Ukraine fascist, imperialist, and genocidal. I think that is false. It's not imperialist. Putin invaded with only 175,000 troops. You cannot take over Ukraine with 175,000 troops. It's not fascist, right? Fascism was a interwar movement as a reaction to Soviet communism. So the only two fascist regimes we've ever seen are Italy and possibly Nazi Germany. Fascism isn't racist, so you can make a good argument that Nazism wasn't really fascist. And also, Peter Zion talked about how the January 6th mob, beat police officers to death, and that's not true. That didn't happen. People died on January 6th. And Ashley Babbitt was shot by an officer, and other people died of strokes, heart attacks, things like that. But the January 6th mob didn't murder anyone. So Peter Zion is incredibly compelling. He's entertaining. He's passionate. But there's a price that you pay frequently when you're compelling, entertaining, and passionate, is that you're wrong about some things. You get so carried away with your passion and putting on a compelling product, and you get an overestimation of your own abilities to simplify what's going on in the world, that you start roughshod over facts and reality. And Peter Zion is vulnerable to doing that.
right now are part of that milieu. They all draw their authority and power not so much from the Communist Party or the Chinese state, but from Xi personally. That's how you get neighborhood HOAs enforcing COVID lockdowns so brutal that fire escapes are welded shut to ensure enforcement, ensuring that people die in easily preventable tragedies like what happened in Urumqi. Or city authorities thinking that they're doing the will of Xi and removing street signs.
Okay, Rodney Martin. Rodney, what's going on, man?
Hey, Luke, how's my sound?
You sound great. Good to talk to you.
Great. How's the world down under?
It's wonderful. I'm having a great time.
Well, you shouldn't have headed off to Australia so soon. You might have gotten a Thanksgiving dinner invitation to Mar-a-Lago with Nick Fuentes and Kanye and Milo and such. Did you get an invitation?
I did not. How about you?
I wouldn't have attended with that clan if I was asked. And what I'm most disappointed in is Trump. Every president has to have people around him, and the president has to have the discipline to listen to them, to say, "Hey, guess who came to dinner, Mr. President? You might want to take Kanye in because the world's kind of given, to some degree, not more recently, a pass. They've been chalking it up to mental illness. But as soon as he let Nick Fuentes in, I think that was point set match for Trump. He crossed the line into the fringe. I think he's going to have a hard time I think he made it more. I think the odds are greater now that he'll have a harder contested primary now than he would have had he shown some discipline and not kept those type of people away. Now, my impression on this triumvirate of Kanye and Nick Fuentes, which kind of interesting given Nick Fuentes' position on people of Kanye's heritage, and Milo. Milo looks like a crackhead that just went down to the Salvation Army and got a suit. And Fuentes is Bitcoin has probably plundered somewhat, so they're now mooching off of Kanye. And as soon as Kanye is 5150'd by somebody and his wife finishes terminating his parental rights and whatever happens, they'll disappear pretty quick. I don't see this as anything more than mooching for personal gain. This is a marriage of convenience, i.e. Fuentes for Fuentes, Milo for Milo, and Kanye, I don't think he really understands what the hell's happening.
Yeah, I can't imagine this happening to any other major political leader. I mean, there's no way that the British Prime Minister would, be having dinner with millennial woes. There's no way that, Justin Trudeau would be having dinner with Kevin Michael Grace. There's no way that the French president would be, meeting with some right-wing commentator. So, yeah, Trump doesn't have the same boundaries as other leaders.
Well, I mean, let's look at this. Even if you agree with these people, there has to be some sort of understanding. Look, do you want to win or do you want to show off? And, I mean, even if, if you want to go about talking about all this stuff, John F. Kennedy had a fetish for Hitler. He talked about Hitler having the things of greatness. He had Hannah Reich at the White House. She was actually at the White House. He invited her into the Oval Office and asked her what he was like after he gave her and her comrades in a gliding. She was she did gliding after the war. So, I mean, this is nothing new, but it's not going to do Trump any better. That's just, does my reservation only get dial up? Interesting. Anyway, I don't understand. I mean, it doesn't do any good. And Trump, he had this problem in his presidency. He tried to run the Oval Office on the cheap by bringing in his liberal daughter, best friend of Chelsea Clinton, and his marvelous son-in-law, who he treated better than his own sons, who actually, it cost him. He got rid of people like Bannon, who were the true believers, in favor of that. And then the people, the adults in the room, like John Kelly, who escorted some of the nut jobs out of the Oval Office, he wouldn't listen to either. So this does not bode well for a second run. And you can look, there's only been one president in history that has made a second run at the White House and succeeded, and that was Grover Cleveland. And that was against a guy that he actually beat in the popular vote when he lost to them in the Electoral College.
So what do you think about Ron DeSantis?
I'm not a big fan of him either, but I've kind of grown sour on the American political system as it is. I mean, I've said for years it's specifically designed to prevent change, and that's what we're seeing. It's specifically designed to prevent change. I mean, I'm not one. I'm not an election denier, but I also understand that the Democrats that in certain states that held the levers of power abused the process to the point that it could have affected the outcome. Did it? I don't know. Do Democrats have a history of cheating? We do know that Lyndon Johnson cheated to become a senator the first time. He had votes counted in cemeteries in Texas, and Richard J. Daley did the same in Chicago in 1960, which tipped it to Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon was urged to push for a recount. He said no, because if it fails, I'll be a sore loser. I won't be able to make a comeback. History proved him correct. Of course, he didn't do well. He was probably the last true outsider besides Trump to actually win and do anything. But I don't know. I mean, I don't think that it's going to be interesting to see what 2024 brings. It's going to be interesting to see what the next 2 years brings. I'm more interested to see if Kevin McCarthy actually becomes the Speaker of the House. I don't think he will. I think he'll have to step aside for somebody that satisfies those 5 Republican holdouts, hoping that they do hold out and not let him become Speaker.
So maybe Steve Scalise?
That would be an awesome choice. And that's somebody McCarthy likes. That's somebody that McCarthy's people likes. I mean, that would be a great pick.
Yeah. And what do you think of the midterm results?
Interesting. There's 2 lines of thought. one can argue that now they're blaming Trump, saying that he had weak candidates, but his candidates, if they were so weak, they sure overperformed what they should have done if they were so bad. I think that, for instance, in Arizona, Blake Masters would have won had limp-wristed, spineless McConnell not pulled the funds out, in the last month. That's when they were desperately needed, and that's when Blake Masters actually closed, did his best in closing. I don't think that would have been the time to cut and run. But be that as it may, you can say that it was weak candidates. And then the other side of the argument is you had a situation where McConnell was afraid of the same dynamic that Kevin McCarthy is facing right now, which is a good thing. So, I mean, McConnell would rather be minority leader than not be voted majority leader and have the GOP in the majority in the Senate. The only saving grace of the midterms is the big issue items of the Biden agenda should be, emphasis on should be, blocked by a GOP House. Now, the emphasis is on should be because the Republicans are famous for rolling over and losing their spine.
And what do you think about Karen Bass as the new mayor of Los Angeles?
Well, I mean, a person that is elected reflects the electorate, and she is the lowest of the low IQ. So obviously, she reflects the LA electorate. We'll just have to wait and see. I have no. Obviously, I was a Caruso fan. I'm not an LA resident, but I was a Caruso fan. I was hoping he could do something to at least, move forward more aggressively and clean up the city and make it, get rid of some of the craziness. But I think LA is going to descend. I think she's going to be the David Dinkins of LA. I think LA is going to become what New York was under David Dinkins. And so be it. Sometimes an addict has to crash and burn really hard before they wake up, and sometimes they never wake up. I mean, LA just may be something on a downward spiral.
And if Joe Biden doesn't run in 2024, who do you think will be the Democratic nominee? I'm thinking maybe Gavin Newsom.
No, I don't think it will be him. I don't think it will be him. I think it will be a free-for-all in the Democratic primary. And I think it'll be someone that, I just don't think it'll be Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom is not universally liked across the whole spectrum of the party. Ricardo asked if SBF is going to go to jail. Nope. All he has to do is stay in the Bahamas.
And
however, he might slip and fall. He might slip and fall in his bathtub. A lot of these crypto kings have age 30 have had heart attacks or mysteriously passed away. He might slip in his bathtub, but I don't think he's ever going to go to jail. I think he knows too much. If I was him, I would be locked in my apartment. I would have a food taster if I could still afford one. I'd have a loaded pistol next to me to guard myself, because all the dirty money that he spread around the Democrats is making him probably more hot than somebody that that turned on the mob in the 1950s.
So, what do you think about this term anti-Semite or anti-Semitism when we don't have the converse, anti-Gentile or anti-Gentilism?
I think it's a meaningless term because it's like racist. It's been so overused and, dare I say, abused to where people just don't even listen to it anymore. And in so doing, it lets real anti-Semites and real racists off the hook, which is probably the intent. It's interesting that people that scream racist the loudest, tend to be people that associate with the Hebrew Israelites, Louis Farrakhan, etc. And if you listen to what comes the bile that they spew seems to be pretty racist, and they're usually the ones that are screaming the racist. So usually people that scream racist, it's a deflection, but it is what it is. The term anti-Semitism is another term that just doesn't seem to be worth anything anymore. because criticism of the IDF, mowing down a bunch of Palestinian civilians is anti-Semitism. Criticism of Israeli trade policy can be anti-Semitism. And that's just absolutely incorrect. We know what anti-Semitism is. It's someone that says, I hate Jews because Jews are Jews and they are whatever they are.
Now, China is having a lot of COVID crackdowns and then protests about COVID crackdowns. A few years ago, everyone was so sure that China was on a trajectory to be the most powerful nation on earth. Now China seems to be just having a lot of problems. How solid do you think China's Communist Party is? Would you be shocked if it was essentially overthrown or torn up by a civil war, say, in the next decade?
No, that's not going to happen. I heard this hype when I saw the guy standing in front of the tank in Tiananmen Square, and we still don't know who the guy standing in front of the tank in Tiananmen Square was because he's disappeared into a gulag somewhere. We hear this, we got to be very careful not to be influenced by Western media, it's totally different over there. The difference between, I always said, the difference between the Chinese and the Soviets in 1991 is the Chinese will fire on their own people, whereas the Soviets, the Red Army, when push came to shove in the squares of Moscow in 1991, refused. They just gave up. They weren't going to do that. So the Chinese are quite different. The Chinese Communist Party is quite different. The People's Liberation Army is quite different, and so is their state security apparatus. So any idea that there's going to be some sort of color revolution in China, we've gotten too drunk on our successes in overturning a couple of elections in Ukraine, that which has resulted in not very good results for Ukraine, by the way. Time is not on protesters' side when you're facing a behemoth like China. It's almost, and I also find it hypocritical when you have people fanning the protests of, the Chinese protesters are heroes, but certain protesters in the United States are staging an insurrection. What's the difference? Just wondering.
How cognitively with it do you think Joe Biden is? Do you think that he's the most powerful man in the world, or is there someone pulling the strings behind Joe Biden?
I think Ron Klain and Jill Biden are the ones that are pulling the strings. We're talking about a guy that shakes hands with thin air. So think about it for a minute. You see a guy that openly, and the fact that the media doesn't say anything, but yet I remember in the last year of the Trump administration when Trump held his hand under his glass to take a drink to steady it so it wouldn't spill on his probably $2,000 suit. Don't blame him. They said, he had cognitive functions problems. But yet there's nothing to see here. A guy that shakes hands with thin air. I mean, there's a bad situation. It'd be interesting. We just seen in Arizona where the winning candidate for governor didn't debate. I'm wondering, would they actually release? If just to say, for instance, Trump isn't the nominee for president in 2024, and Biden does decide to go for it, or the people around him decide to push that poor old doddering fool out there again, would they really want him debating a DeSantis? I mean, think about it. Let alone a Trump. If I was Biden's people and we were going to push the old guy out there again so we can keep our cushy jobs and keep ramming stuff up the hind ends of America and taxing them to death and whatever, I would rather him run against Trump than against DeSantis. But we'll have to see. No, I don't believe he's all cognitively there. When I worked in Washington in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, I mean, he was known back then. There was like a few senators that the female staffers were told to stay away from. One of them was Bob Packwood of Oregon. The other one was Joe Biden of Delaware.
I wonder why we haven't heard those stories. I mean, you think more women might have come out with their stories.
Well, they have. I mean, this Tara Reid, hers is compelling. And the fact that even her best friend, who was a Biden supporter, who said, yes, I believe her, I believe it happened, but I'm voting for Joe Biden. It goes to show you just how low IQ the Democrat voter has become in the year 2022. I mean, think about it. You had her best friend, and then there was the audio clip of her mother calling into Larry King, and so I mean, there was plenty of reports at the time. You had the situation of the Latina candidate who's running for lieutenant governor in Nevada, Lucy Flores. He went up and sniffed her hair, and there's video of that. She complained about it, and what did the Democrats do? They promptly told her she couldn't run for office again. I mean, think about it.
I wonder what kind of cocktail Joe Biden was on for the debates with Trump. I'd really like to know what the drugs were.
Who knows? I mean, could he? I mean, who says he had to have been on anything?
Oh, he was considerably more alert than he normally appears.
Well, sometimes he is, and I notice. If you notice, he's his more lucid statements are the ones in the morning, which is consistent with someone that has dementia. When was the last time he had a nighttime press, announce anything to the country at night? That's usually when someone with dementia, has problems. But his early morning stuff is usually pretty good, and that's when a person that has, I'm not saying Alzheimer's, but person that has the beginning trends of dementia has problems. And I'm not making that analysis. My daughter, who's a nurse, says that she's just made that observation based on what she has seen with patients that has the early onset. Maybe he just has. I'm not a doctor. I haven't observed him, but he sure does fit the bill of someone that has early onset dementia or is cognitively impaired.
And who do you think is going to win the World Cup?
I don't know. Don't care.
Okay. What do you think about what's going on in Russia versus Ukraine?
Winter. Russia's gearing up. Russia's knocking out their Ukrainian infrastructure. Here on the long. You were right. He went in with only I think you said 175,000 troops. I thought he went in with 125,000. So I'll stand corrected if it's a 175. I think Putin's original objective was to do what he did with Crimea, was to just march in and either take everything east of the river. I can't think of the name of it right now. But anyway, or eastern Ukraine, sever the country. I never thought he wanted to take Kiev as a whole. I always thought that was a feinting maneuver to divide their forces. But be that as it may, he soon learned that since 2014, the West has been arming that country to a T and training them. And I think this is why he probably felt he had no choice but to go in and do something. Because when you're sending in that type of weaponry, think about it. What's the difference between 2012, 2013 Ukraine and Crimea? Why didn't they fight so hard for Crimea as opposed to that? Well, they had how many years of being armed with Western arms, Western training. So he had to just knock that threat out. Now, trying to do it with 125 or 150, 175,000 troops against, and I looked at the troop levels of the Ukrainian army going into January at the beginning of the war. They had an army under arms of about 700,000 troops. You could call up, and then Zelensky mobilized his population, which Putin didn't do until most recently. He mobilized 300,000. It all goes down to this. War is about, I think his initial planning was flawed. I think he should have just done the all-out Soviet-type invasion of Eastern Europe. I think he should have just bombed the living hell out of Ukraine, including the major city, including the cities along the Polish border, which are serving as the transit routes for Western weapons. I think he should have just demolished those cities and just gone all in with 300 to 400,000 troops and rolled over Ukraine and taken it. He decided not to because, he called this a special military operation, and he was trying to, I think it always says, there was a reason why the Germans had the battle plans in France in 1940 that they did. The Germans wanted to take it relatively whole, intact, and not have to clean up a big mess and capture, a lot of things intact, like they were able in Czechoslovakia. They captured the Skoda works intact. Very similar. Well, he doesn't have that now. He has all-out war. So now he's kind of doing what the Soviets did in 1941-42. The winter is a Russian ally. It's not a Ukrainian ally. He's using rockets and missiles and artillery to knock out their power grid. It's very cold in Ukraine right now. If you look at satellite pictures of electricity, of lights, it's like North Korea now. And what he's doing is he's amping up those 300,000 troops that he's called up, and he's pulling up more tanks from the Far East. And I think probably come early next year, Ukraine's in for a hell of a hurting. So I think we're going to see a different type of war.
And what are the chances that this war goes nuclear?
It doesn't. It doesn't unless Ukraine tries to do another shenanigan like they did bombing Poland, which made them, I think, look horrible. I don't understand where the outrage. Here they bomb Poland, try to blame the Russians, and immediately the U.S. even says that wasn't the Russians because they're watching. We have better satellites, of course. And, I think there's also there's definitely a weariness in Europe. The Germans have backed off quite a bit. They've not sent their Leopard tanks that they've been promising they're going to send. There's a weariness because Zelensky's he's just a pathological liar, number one. And that little bombing escapade, I think, was meant to draw NATO into the war. And I think that really shook, I think it shook the Poles somewhat, but definitely shook some of the other Western. Plus, there's not unanimity in terms of NATO in this thing to begin with. Orban's not necessarily supportive of it. The Czechs aren't, the Slovaks aren't, a lot of them aren't.
Okay.
I mean, who wants? It's wintertime. It's wintertime. They need that Russian gas. And I mean, look at the utility bills in Europe right now. It's incredible.
Right. So this is going to end with Russia getting most of what they want, essentially, and Ukraine signing off on that.
I think in some form. I think Russia will get the areas that they have annexed and declared part of Russia. I think Ukraine will have to declare themselves a neutral state, which there's no harm, no foul there. I mean, matter of fact, if I remember correctly, look back, Russia didn't even care if they became part of the EU. It was the NATO bug that was the issue. And so I think, where I think this ends up is Russia keeps the territory. There's no way Putin can give that territory back. There's too much blood, and blood's been spilled for it. Plus, those people there, they're Russians. They want to be Russians. And then I think there's going to be kind of a split. Let the rest of Ukraine be in the EU, but they're neutral. They're not part of NATO. And everybody goes in peace and serves the Lord.
Okay. Okay, great. Rodney, any final words for today before I move on?
Hey, how long are you going to stay down under, Luke?
Coming back to LA at the end of January.
Oh, wow. Hey, look, somebody in the chat asked me if I had like dial-up on my reservation. I don't know because I'm too busy having that person's mom in my teepee right now warming me up. So I'll sign off on that.
Okay, thanks, Rodney. Okay, take care, man. Let's get back to something
with the word emergency in them because they assume that's what Xi wants in order to smother citizen awareness. If we see meaningful resistance to any Chinese policy, China goes one of two directions. Option one, you get a rolling series of government breakdowns as Xi's authority is challenged, and there's no one to step in to replace it because he has purged the system so completely. COVID is only one Chinese policy that feels a bit out of place. What about the social monitoring system that has created an information state tighter than Cold War East Germany? What about lending controls that have contributed to real estate distortions 2 orders of magnitude larger than America's subprime? What about laws against the VPNs that allow you to share your kids' photos without them being entered into a national database? What about the deliberate cultural destruction policies for the Uyghurs and Tibetans? A crack in Xi's personal authority isn't simply a crack in the facade, but a fissure to the core which would unleash a torrent of dissent that would wash away everything. We're already seeing the protests spread to non-related issues. University students are getting in on it. Opinions are being aired on dictatorship versus democracy, economic growth, housing, how good or how bad a job Xi personally is doing. In a country where any sort of common coordinated public outcry is viewed as treason, we are already hip deep. Or there's always option B. Xi puts a stop to it. Xi is a child of the Cultural Revolution, a 10-year-long internal repression so intense it killed at least 40 million people and gutted what then passed for the Chinese economy. Neither of these are great options, but both of them are emblematic of the long run of Chinese history. Either China becomes too tightly wound and controlled and it descends into an orgy of self-destruction, or central authority breaks and China spins apart in an orgy of self-destruction.
Okay, so self-destruction, self-immolation, maybe civil war, possibly ahead for China. He designs for you. Let's get a little more from Richard Spencer.
And he monetizes it. And there's no doubt. I mean, I don't know what to say. This might be Milo's masterpiece. You know, Ye certainly isn't broke. I don't think so. You know, I could imagine him taking a few million off Ye.
Could happen. And this reminds me of what we've been talking about with religion. You talked about how the
Okay, this is Richard talking about Beardson and
talking about this in 6 months, but nevertheless, you need money now. Keep in mind as well, there's some recent polls that were released. I mean, Trump is still in the lead in Republican primaries. So he is a real threat. He's not just done or over. He might be in jail at some point, but he might still win the Republican primary. He's under 50% in the Republican primary, but often. But he's still leading by 10 or 20 points. So he's a real threat. Now, what is the kind of like, what is the motivation of Nick beyond just, this is an amazing kind of hilarious, you know, kind of thing? I think there is and I saw this, I also saw this on Twitter last night. There was Andrew Anglin called in to one of these Nick aligned streamers. It's actually this guy who is perhaps one of the most toxic people around, Beardson, Beardley or whatever, just a horrible character. And basically, Andrew Anglin is totally behind this. He's totally behind Yeism. And he was describing it as, we want to get people super Christian and super radical, and this is how we do it. It's just crazy enough to work. We just need to push them into this. And I kind of understand what he's doing. I do feel like there's some whiffs of Yang Gang 2019. And if you guys remember this, Andrew Yang, at least in 2019, I think was a fairly interesting guy. I think he's pretty contemptible at this point. You know, precisely because he hasn't reinvented himself and he hasn't actually even stuck to his guns. He's now just promoting like reasonable centrist third positionism, which is just stupid. And it's, you know, he has this new party that's staffed by Republicans. I don't know, never Trumpers. I mean, it's just, anyway. But he was really compelling in 2019. And it was like the UBI, we're going to all be automated out of our jobs. Right now, it's factory workers. Soon it will be truck drivers. Then it will be lawyers. And then it will be everyone, be doctors at some point. We're all just going to get eaten up by robots. And so we need to have this dividend for everyone that comes from this automation economy. And so everyone will get $1,000 a month. And that will allow you to kind of invent the next thing. It was this both kind of socialism on one level, but then also one that kind of buys into myths of Silicon Valley, hook, line, and
Hey, Richard speaking out here against anti-Semitism.
We're talking about the same Warren Baylog on
I mean,
PRS?
yeah, I know.
Yeah, he knows who
Yeah, I mean, but don't you think that's a pretty? I don't know. I think that's pretty surprising. I mean, I know these people have you know, I know what their position on that issue is, but anyway, it's kind of.
Wait, why is that surprising? Because Warren Baylog's like the king of the JQ and Hitler and all that stuff.
Well, I know, but like, go ahead, Andrew.
Well, yeah, but to make that your number, to say that is more important, you're placing your like an enemy or an opponent and centering that as like being against these people is.
So the allegation is Warren Baylog said that being against Jews is more important than being pro-white.
The central issue.
It's a positive belief. Yeah. Well, Sven did a whole rant about that, saying, yeah, anti-Semitism is the positive identity. He's saying that's all that matters. And
I mean, literally,
that is absurd.
Like literally, not even the Nazis said that. No. They didn't even say anything close to that. I mean, anyway, so.
Yeah, but nothing. I mean, I hesitate to say this. I think I would say this. I think civilization is of equal importance to race. I would actually say that because it's not just the
civilization comes in large part from race and geography, right? Genetics and geography produce civilization.
White race. Like, it's not just about like maintaining people with light skin, blue eyes or whatever. And that's great. But that's just kind of like the point of this is that we are part of a civilization that actually is kind of beyond ourselves. And we want to advance this civilization. I think those are of equal importance. You kind of can't have one without the other. The white race without a civilization is just biology. And, you know, whether the civilization can.
Yeah, but it's civilizations created by genetics in a particular place, meaning genetics and geography.
Exist without the white race. I think capitalism can certainly exist without the white race. I don't think a civilization, as we understand it, can. So I would stress that. But like the JQ, I mean, look, it's important, and obviously, like what I'm dedicating most of my time now is analyzing the symbolism and cultural impact and theology, you could say.
So this is what he spent most of his time on, but his analysis is just very juvenile.
of Judaism and Christianity. But like just hating Jews or whatever, like hating Israel, it's actually pretty low on the list, to be frank.
Well, he said the world, we've never gotten to see what the world could be like without Jews, because we've always had this disease scourge. So we need to see we need to give the world a chance to see what we're capable of without Jews.
Well, first off, that's genocidal and insane. And secondly, I would even push back. I mean, like, why is that? Why is that? This disease, as he calls it, why is that? You know, like the Christian anti-Semitism has been around since the Gospel of John. And it is, you know, not the original Christians, but certainly like as the second or third generation of Christian fathers, like yes, they kind of evolved into what could be called anti-Semitic. Paul was
different groups have different interests, right? Different groups inevitably have clashes, right? Human desires are infinite. Human resources available to us are limited. So you can call these conflicts of interest, you can call them anti-Semitism or racism or bigotry, but what they are fundamentally at core is a clash of group interests.
Pastor of the Gentiles, but the idea that he's anti-Semitic is, you know, a little bit of it there, but it's absurd.
Well,
so we've been doing this Christian anti-Semitism for 2,000 years. They've been hammering away at the Jews.
Well, you know, the intellectual.
Have they gotten very far with that?
It's not like there's just been Christian anti-Semitism for 2,000 years. Christianity contains both critical and positive views of Jews. It's not like Christianity is monolithically anti-Jewish or monolithically pro-Jewish, right? You have a conflict of interest between two religious groups, you know, claiming divine sanction for their way of life. And there's plenty of pro-Jewish stuff in Christianity and plenty of Jewish critical material.
Well, you know,
they seem to still be around.
The other kind of anti-Semitism scares Jews way more. I don't know if it was you or somebody else who was saying.
I mean, within Judaism, you'll find, you know, negative sentiments about Christians, some negative sentiments about Arabs and Cossacks.
There's some quote where the guy said there was like Italian anti-Semitism, which was like you should be Christians, and then there was German anti-Semitism, which was way scarier, which was like you're a biological.
Yeah, you're a race, like, as opposed to we should convert you.
Biological.
You just haven't recognized. Yeah, you haven't recognized. You haven't recognized Jesus yet, and so we can convert you. I think that, yeah. I mean, again, what Brahman is pursuing is, it's not. I don't doubt that Jews are a race to some extent. Like you can definitely, you know, I do think that
Jews are a tribe. Now, do all members of tribe have, you know, identical genetic lineage? No. People sometimes get adopted into a tribe, and you can call that adoption process a conversion. But Jews are fundamentally a tribe with religious aspects to that tribal identity that some people participate in and some Jews don't.
They are more or less
Does Judaism have anything positive to say about Christians? Yes, you'll find plenty of Orthodox rabbis say that Jews should be thanking Christians for keeping the issue of abortion front and center. I think it was Maimonides who said Christians should be praised for taking the Jewish scriptures to the whole world. So yeah, there are plenty of positive references to Christians throughout the Jewish tradition, as well as plenty of critical references.
People of the Bible. But I think calling them this, like the idea that Jews are a pure race, I think is absolutely.
Rodney says Islam is positive towards Christ and Mary. Islam has sections of its tradition that are positive towards Christ and Mary and Christianity. They also have parts of their tradition that are highly hostile. Right? It would be naive to think that Islam and Judaism would be wholly, you know, one way or another with regard to another religion. Obviously, they're going to be positive and critical reactions in its text.
Absolutely wrong, and goes against these stories told in the Bible. And you know, they are where they get their power is their religion. They're not like
Jews don't get their power from religion. It's primarily a tribal identity. Right? Jews get their influence and power from their disproportionately high IQ, and high IQ people tend to create more effective institutions and tend to punch above their weight. Anglicans, all right? Very high IQ group, every bit as high IQ as Jews. They tend to punch above their weight in cultural and economic influence.
I guess it's weird to say this, like to think of all Jews as just these like evil, like just bound for evil or something. You know, look, do some of these stereotypes that we have about Jews, do they kind of fit? Are they tight-fisted or pushy? prone to hysteria. Okay, fair enough. Are they great athletes? No, fair enough. All of that's fair enough. But to then conclude that they're like their DNA makes them evil or something, just guys, this is just.
I wouldn't say evil, but it definitely makes them liars. I've never met another Jew other than me because of the odds.
Okay, so this idea that like all Jews are liars, or all Christians are liars, or all Muslims are liars, or all blacks are liars is absurd. I mean, you'll find plenty of lying and plenty of truth-telling in every race and every religion. Right? No group has a monopoly on truth. No group has a monopoly on lying.
That would tell you the truth about political stuff. Like they all lie.
I've met plenty. Oh, come on, they're genetically programmed to lie.
Yeah, I feel like
come on.
I've seen my grandparents do it, and I felt like they didn't even know when they were. I felt like it was weird.
Where's their real power? Their real power is their religion.
Most Jews have almost nothing to do with their religion, so that's obviously not the source of their power. Right? Jews have a tribal identity, but most Jews in America marry out, so tribal identity is fairly weak among most American Jews. So to the extent that Jews have disproportionate power and influence, it comes from having above average IQs, and as a secondary matter, they tend to live in urban centers where it's much easier to be influential than if you live in the country.
It's what we don't really have. Like that's the reason why they're significant. That's the reason why Christian anti-Semitism is going to be hammering away at the Pharisees for 2,000 years and obviously get nowhere with them. How many times have they been oppressed and expelled? How many times have there been pogroms that have, materialized spasmodically in which a bunch of Jewish shopkeepers got the shit kicked out of them? How many times have we seen that throughout history? And yet it's really unsuccessful, don't you think? Really amazing. We have a religion of billions of people, the most popular religion.
Maybe it's not so unsuccessful. Maybe it's a understandable reaction in certain circumstances. Christianity has had more than its share of success. Right? Approximately 2 billion people in the world identify as Christian.
Religion on earth. It's apparently anti-Semitic. And yet here we are. I mean, Kanye isn't wrong when he talks about there are a lot of Jews in Hollywood, a lot of Jews in the media, a lot of Jews on Wall Street. They have a state that is a Jewish state. Obviously, we've tried the Christian anti-Semitism thing, and it clearly does not work.
Well, what about
the question of why it doesn't work? No, I'm not going to sign off on biological extermination. That's a non-starter.
No, not extermination. Right. Just like no.
Because I don't think they're a race. I do not think they gain their power from being a race. Remember, Ashkenaz.
There are people, and yeah, you can call them a race. Doesn't fit 100%, but it doesn't fit for calling the English a race or Australians a race 100% either. It's an approximation of a tribal identity.
Jews are 50% and higher European. Find plenty of Ashkenazi Jews with blonde hair and blue eyes. They're like us. They're European. And it's not wrong to say that they're like an ethnicity of.
They have a component of European ancestry. They also have a component of Middle Eastern ancestry, right? Jews tend to be more emotional, tend to wear their feelings on their sleeve more than Europeans. When you go to the Middle East, you'll see other Middle Eastern peoples have similar, more volatile, more expressive emotional reactions.
Of Europe. And like, where do they develop their power? Their power is cultural, it's religious, it's psychological. That's the greatest power in the universe. And yet that's exactly what the Christian anti-Semites adore and don't want to contradict. I mean, it's just, when you take a step backward, it's actually fairly obvious.
Right, a little Richard Spencer commentary there on Christianity. And talks about how much he's been studying this issue with Mark Brahman. I think he could go a lot deeper.
Judaism as important. But being critical, getting at was, it might have been
the liberal, secular Jewish communities of America and other European countries.
Yes. I mean, it's very clear that, I forgot who said this. It might have been Meyer Kahan.
Is DNA more important than God? Well, more important for what? All right. Your DNA can predispose you to all sorts of illnesses. Your DNA sets the contours for what you're capable of. Belief in God can be a tremendous source of comfort and power and inspiration and connection to other people. So which is more powerful? It depends for what?
Or something. It just America is the mausoleum of the Jewish race. Or there's some comments like this, and what this person was getting at was the tendency for intermarriage, the tendency for like ultimate cultural assimilation, and the tendency.
Most Jews in America are marrying non-Jews,
as we see here, of like clearly.
And then they don't raise, most Jews who marry non-Jews do not raise their children as Jews.
Being critical of Zionism at the end of the day. Kind of still maintain.
Yeah, so American Jews are less and less identified with the Jewish state of Israel.
Maintaining a certain Jewish identity and still actually seeing Judaism as important. But, you know, becoming more secular and ultimately seeing kind of Israel as a bit of an embarrassment to Jewish identity.
I mean, some people.
It's a bit of an embarrassment if you got a left-wing identity, not because you're then a bad person, but because you put your left-wing values, your cosmopolitan values, your liberal values ahead of your tribal values, right? Doesn't make you a bad person to put your political ideology ahead of your tribal identity. So that's why left-wing Jews, by and large, do not particularly care for an ethnic state such as Israel.
People have gone so far as to say that the American or diasporic Jewish, you know, identity and experience and values are more kind of authentically Jewish, since
there's no true Jew, right? Jews, you know, have a different expression in Sydney, Australia, than they do in Jerusalem, than they do in Tel Aviv, than they do in Damascus, than they do in London or New York or Los Angeles. Right? Jews express themselves differently in different situations, just as Christians do, right? Christians widely vary all over the world, or even within the same city. You have Korean Christian churches and African Christian churches and Swedish Christian churches. Very different experiences, very different people, very different life results in these different churches.
I mean, obviously, they've been a diaspora. I mean, except for small numbers, for most, you know, so much of recent history. So I don't know. I don't even really know. Which I think that argument is somewhat compelling.
Yeah, Richard, this is how they do it. Remember, when Jews pursued hardcore Jewish nationalism and separatism, they got crushed.
Wait, they started the modern Jewish state, and it is now the most powerful military in the Middle East. So they did okay. Other times, when they went into hardcore nationalism and separatism, they got crushed by the Romans. Same time, Romans also got crushed. That marked the end of the Roman Empire expanding and the beginning of the Roman Empire declining, because they had to, you know, suffer such losses in their battles with Jews 2,000 years ago.
And when, you know, like a much more applicable or successful evolutionary strategy has been the strategy that they pursue in a way in the United States. And assimilation is also part of it. Remember, like,
sometimes nationalism and putting up boundaries against the outside world is the best strategy. It depends on the situation. It's not like one strategy is always superior to another.
The first, like, canonization of the Bible itself is a Greek project.
That's absurd. I mean, Richard talks about how he's spending so much time learning about Judaism and Christianity and studying with Mark Brahman. He doesn't know the first thing. It wasn't Greeks who canonized the Hebrew Bible, right? It was Jews, it was Jewish rabbis, taking place 2,000 years ago. He's getting confused with a translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek, the Septuagint, which took place about 2,300 years ago.
There were a ton of Jewish Greeks and a ton of Gentile Greeks who were interested in monotheism. This led to the translation of the Pentateuch, and really canonization of the Pentateuch.
The translation of the Pentateuch into the Septuagint was not the canonization of the Pentateuch or the Hebrew Bible. Two very different things. Right? If you translate my autobiography, right, into Greek, you're not canonizing it. You're translating it. Two very different activities.
In Egypt in 250. So like that's a more natural Jewish, you know, project than the outright that kind of blood and soil nationalism.
No. Highly assimilated Jews translating their texts into Gentile languages is not a more authentic representation of Jews or Judaism than some kind of hardcore separatism. They're both strategies employed by Jews at different times in different situations, and one strategy is more adaptive in some circumstances, and another strategy is more adaptive in other circumstances.
Like, this is our state, we're going to do it. Fuck you, Roman Empire, etc. That has at least.
Yeah, going to war with the Roman Empire was really stupid. It was not an effective Jewish strategy.
In history, in the ancient world, led to pain. and suffering.
Yes, it was a bad strategy. All right, let's get a bit more
Months
here.
in the past. There's no doubt about it. Abrahamic paradigm. So they see is kind of part of the future, and even Muslims, even someone who's at least ostensibly antithetical to them, but also Muslims are within the Abrahamic paradigm. So it's a little bit. There's a kind of another.
The Abrahamic paradigm effectively only means something to scholars of religion and people with esoteric interests. Right? Even if Christianity, Judaism, and Islam supposedly all share the Abrahamic paradigm, in the real world, that doesn't mean much. In the real world, sometimes Jews, Christians, and Muslims have things in common as opposed to the secular atheist onslaught. But plenty of times they have clashes of interests.
There's a layer to it. You know, both Muslims and Christians have engaged in anti-Semitic violence in the past. There's no doubt about it. But to see either of those groups as deeply anti-Judaism or anti-Jewish in that sense is
it depends on the time and place. In some contexts, it would make sense if those groups are fighting for supremacy or fighting for survival. It would make sense for them to have a lot of negative feelings, including fear and hatred and resentment towards outgroups. Sometimes it makes sense for an individual to have a lot of fear and hatred towards outgroups. Usually, in the first world today, you are not well served going around with an intense hatred for outgroups. On the other hand, you're not served walking around with zero antipathy for outgroups. And if you just have a mild to moderate antipathy for outgroups, that will give you a stronger in-group identity and a stronger sense of purpose and identity, right? But if your antipathy to outgroups becomes too extreme, you become less effective in the world and less happy.
It's also wrong. There's a kind of layer to it. I mean, this is the Caducean idea.
So he keeps throwing around this term Caducean, and I don't think he really knows what he's talking about. So Caduceus, right? This is a Greek thing here. He throws it around so much. It's a favorite by Mark Brahman. So it's a Greek symbol, all right? It's a staff carried by Hermes in Greek mythology, and it can be, Caducean can refer to peace-loving, or it can refer to rhetorical power. So it's a symbolic object, and Mark Brahman, Richard Spencer can't stop talking about Caducean, but I'm not sure their use of the terminology adds anything to what they're saying. Why does it not add anything? Because I'm not sure they really understand what they're talking about.
Definitely think that's true, but maybe the kind of like Western or diasporic Jew is kind of the real Jew in a way. The one who lives here, who's values Judaism, but
there's no real Jew, right? There's no one true expression of Judaism or Christianity or Islam or being Aryan, right? There's one expression in Sweden. There's a different expression in South Africa. There's a different expression in Australia, right? In different times and places, people will express their identities differently. It's not like the true Christian, the true Jew, the true Muslim.
Kind of left it behind. I think that might be, in some ways, truer to themselves.
The other interesting thing is not
so he's going to opine. He's going to opine on what is true Judaism. I mean, it's ludicrous. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Called for
Let's go to
bringing Ukraine into NATO.
Mearsheimer.
Second, bringing Ukraine into the European Union. And three, promoting a color revolution, an orange revolution in Ukraine that would turn Ukraine into a pro-Western liberal democracy. So it was this three-pronged strategy that the Russians, unsurprisingly, viewed as an existential threat. And what's happened since April 2008, when the United States forced NATO to say that Ukraine would become part of NATO, is that this situation has gotten worse and worse. And the crisis first broke out on February 22nd, 2014. And then, of course, we had a war starting on February 24th of 2022.
So let's just talk about what we've learned for a moment since February the 24th, 2022. Has anything about the progress of that war, from the original multi-pronged invasion of Ukraine by the Russians right through to their gradual retreat to smaller regions within Ukraine, has any part of that surprised you?
I think that I have been surprised by the fact that the Russians performed poorly. You want to remember that the Russians went to war in Georgia in August of 2008. And the Russian army, although it won that war rather quickly, performed very poorly. And the Russians then set out to reform their military so that the next time they fought, they'd perform much better. And I think almost everybody thought the Russian army, especially, would do well in Ukraine. And it has not done well. It has struggled. There's no question about that. So I've been surprised by that.
And what should we learn from that, sort of philosophically, if anything? I mean, is there any wider lesson from the underperformance of the Russians, do you think, in terms of how we should treat the next crisis, or what we should have known all along?
Well, I think what it shows is you never know how a military will perform until you get into the fight. If you think of the situation regarding Taiwan, China has not fought a war since 1979. That was a long time ago. And the question of how the Chinese military would perform in a war over Taiwan is really unclear in the extreme, because they haven't fought a war in a long time. And as we know from this Ukrainian case and the Russian military performance, sometimes you think a military is going to perform very well, and it doesn't. And vice versa, by the way. So it just shows you how much uncertainty there is when it comes to going to war. In many ways, anytime you go to war, you're rolling the dice. And the Russians, I think, understood they were rolling the dice. I think all the evidence is running up to when the war started that Putin did not want to invade Ukraine. He was working mightily to try to avoid that outcome, because I think he understood that it would be very messy. And of course, it has proved to be very messy.
I want to come on to those, the idea of what the Russian end goals are, but let me put a couple of arguments to you which people have said sort of in opposition to your more realist worldview, and see what you make of them. One of them is that your whole premise is that the Russians were acting rationally, realistically. They were defending their sphere of influence. It was intolerable for them to have NATO coming so close to their borders, and this was a sort of act of self-defense in some way. But if they've shown to be so much weaker than certainly we, and perhaps even they, realized, were they acting realistically? Is there actually an argument that they've now learnt, and the world has shown them, the Russian side, that they had an unrealistic estimation of their own power, of their own sphere of influence, and that reality has now adjusted?
Well, what I think you have to understand is that when countries think they're facing an existential threat and they become desperate, they're willing to roll the dice. They're willing to pursue incredibly risky strategies. And the best example of this is when Japan attacked the United States at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. It's very important to understand the Japanese understood full well.
Okay, the same thing would appear to people that you marginalize and cancel, right? You cancel someone, right? You say no one should have dinner with them, then they may be willing to roll the dice and engage in risky antisocial behavior that they wouldn't otherwise. So it's kind of a dangerous thing to marginalize, cancel people you don't know how they're going to react.
They were attacking Godzilla. The United States had 10 times the gross national product that Japan had. It had the capability to build a much more formidable military. And the Japanese had no illusions that they would win the war. They thought there was a sliver of a chance they would win, but they would most likely lose. But nevertheless, they attacked. And the reason they attacked is they were desperate. The United States was economically strangling Japan at the time, and it was threatening to knock Japan out of the ranks of the great powers. And the Japanese felt they just had to do something. So you want to understand that when great powers are desperate, they are willing to take extreme measures. This, by the way, is one of the reasons we should worry greatly about the Russians using nuclear weapons if the Russians are losing the war in Ukraine. If they're losing the war in Ukraine to NATO and to its Ukrainian allies, they will certainly be in a desperate situation. And when states, great powers especially, are in desperate straits, they tend to use extreme measures to try to rescue the situation. So I think what happened on February 24th is that Putin concluded that he really had no choice if he was going to prevent the West from turning Ukraine into a Western bulwark on Russia's borders than to attack, and that he did.
I want to come on to this nuclear question as well. Let me throw one other argument at you, which is that the relative strength and the relative performances of the Ukrainian side and the Russian side, of course, is partly explained by resourcing and military training and backing. But is there not also a component which tends to be absent from the realist worldview, which is of kind of moral righteousness or sense of idealism that is more present on the Ukrainian side because they feel their homeland has been invaded and because they are so committed to it, which is absent, or at least there a lot less within the Russian military, who are evidently less committed to it. And that partly explains the Ukrainian success so far at repelling the Russian incursion. Do you think what we've seen here in a way is the opposite of a realist outcome? What we've seen is the little guy, the plucky little guy, because Ukraine is so idealistic and so determined to defend themselves, outperforming against the odds?
Well, I think the key word here is nationalism. Right? There's no doubt that when the Russians invaded Ukraine, that nationalism came racing to the fore, and that Ukrainian nationalism is a force multiplier in this case. And there's also no doubt that nationalism is not part of the realist theory of international politics that I have, but nationalism is consistent with realism. So nationalism and realism fit together rather neatly. But the point you want to remember is that nationalism is also at play on the Russian side. And the more time goes by, and the more the Russians feel that the West has its gun sights on Russia and is trying to not only defeat Russia, but knock Russia out of the ranks of the great powers, the more Russian nationalism will kick in. You want to be very careful not to judge the outcome of this war at this particular juncture. This war has got a long time to go, and it's going to play itself out in ways that are hard to predict. But I think there is a good chance that in the end, the Russians will prevail. I'm not saying that will happen, but you don't want to say at this point in time, Ukraine has won, Russia has lost. That remains to be seen. Just watching the events that are happening now in Ukraine, it's quite clear that the Russians are destroying the infrastructure in Ukraine. This is going to have huge consequences. Furthermore, the Russians are mobilizing more and more troops, and they have 3 times as many people, and they have much greater wealth than Ukraine does. Of course, you might counter that the West is backing Ukraine to the hilt, and therefore compensating for those disadvantages that Ukraine has in terms of wealth and in terms of manpower. And there is an element of truth in that. But let's see how long the West remains deeply committed to Ukraine. So all I'm saying is, let's not judge too soon how this one is going to end.
You mentioned a moment ago the nuclear threat. What is, in your view, the correct way to treat that threat? What is the kind of realist answer to a country such as Russia that has nuclear power? Because if they could always brandish it, and to threaten them or come up to them in any way is just to risk some kind of nuclear conflict, then they can do whatever they like. At what point do we have to stand up to people even if they do have nuclear weapons?
Well, the question is, are you willing to be incinerated to stand up to the Russians over Ukraine and push them to the brink? That's the question you have to ask yourself. It was the question that John F. Kennedy and his lieutenants had to ask himself during the Cuban Missile Crisis. For me and most of my realist friends, we fully appreciate that you have to be extremely careful when you're dealing with a rival great power that is armed to the teeth with nuclear weapons that are aimed at you, and that you cannot back that great power into a corner. You cannot put it in a situation where it's desperate. You cannot threaten its survival, because in those circumstances, there is a reasonable chance they will use nuclear weapons. And if they use nuclear weapons, you understand, there'll be no more London. There'll be no more Europe if we get into a general thermonuclear war. And my principal goal is to avoid that. And what I find quite remarkable at this point in time is how few people seem to understand that danger. There is all sorts of talk in the West about defeating Russia inside Ukraine, wrecking its economy, causing regime change, and maybe even breaking up Russia the way the Soviet Union was broken up. This is a country that has thousands of nuclear weapons. If its survival is threatened, it's likely to use them. So we have this perverse paradox here that most people don't seem to realize, which is that the more successful NATO and Ukraine are against Russia, the more likely it is that the Russians will use nuclear weapons. In circumstances like that, I would go to great lengths to try and work out some sort of arrangement to put an end to this war as quickly as possible. I think what JFK did during the Cuban Missile Crisis was exactly the right thing. Kennedy understood full well that the last thing we needed was a general thermonuclear war between the United States and the Soviet Union. Where's JFK today? I can't find him. And I find instead all sorts of people in the West, in the public, talking about public intellectuals, commentators, journalists, and so forth and so on, and even foreign policymakers talking in rather cavalier ways about defeating the Russians. I think this is foolish.
So you talked about you and your realist friends there. What is the line for you then? Clearly you don't think that the eastern parts, or even perhaps the whole of Ukraine, is of core strategic interest to the United States, or maybe not even to Western Europe. What is of core strategic interest? At what point do you think we would have to resist a Russian aggression? Would that be the Baltic states, for example? And you may well say there's no evidence that Putin has the Baltic states in mind, but let's play the theoretical game. Were he to invade one of those countries, do you think at that point would you support proper, full to the hilt defense?
Well, the Baltic states are in NATO. Poland and Romania are in NATO. They have an Article 5 guarantee. And if the Russians were to attack those countries, we would have to come to the defense of those countries. There's no question about that.
And you would support that?
I would support that.
Up to and including nuclear war?
Well, I'm not talking about using nuclear weapons to defend those countries, right? What you would use are conventional forces. And if you were losing, the basic strategy or the basic doctrine is that you would countenance using nuclear weapons. What I would do in the event is hard to say. But the key point here is defending the Baltic states, defending Poland, defending Romania against a Russian invasion, which is not going to happen, by the way. This is a figment of the West's imagination, right? The Russians can't even win in Ukraine, much less countenance attacking and conquering all those other countries. But let's hypothetically talk about what would happen if Russia attacked those countries. The United States would come to their defense. That's a very different issue than talking about defeating the Russians in a particular country, wrecking their economy, causing regime change, and maybe even breaking Russia up. There is a fine line out there that you don't want to cross. Some people refer to that as a red line. You just want to be very, very careful when you're dealing with a country that has nuclear weapons. That's not to say you don't want to defend yourself if that country attacks you or attacks an important ally, but there are limits to how far you can go in terms of threatening that nuclear-armed adversary. That's my point.
On the specifics of Ukraine then, what should we have done do you think? I mean, if we consign to the history books all the events that led us up to February the 24th, 2022, at the point of the invasion, whatever the rights and wrongs of what had happened prior to that, what do you think a wise response by the West would have been?
Well, first of all, in April 2008, when NATO said Ukraine would become part of NATO, and the Russians made it clear that that was an existential threat and that was unacceptable to them, we should have backed off right then. We should have done nothing more. Then the crisis broke out on February 22nd, 2014. We should have recognized the severity of the situation, and we should have backed off and worked with the Russians to create some sort of modus vivendi where the Russians felt that they weren't threatened by NATO in Ukraine and that Ukraine could remain a neutral state. But instead, what we did was we doubled down. Okay. Then, over the course of 2021, right, the situation deteriorated, right? And on December 17th, 2021, the Russians sent a letter to NATO and to President Biden demanding that they get in writing that Ukraine would not become part of NATO. What we should have done then is backed off and tried to work out some sort of modus vivendi where the Russians were satisfied with the situation in Ukraine, right? And the threat of war was taken off the table. Instead, we told the Russians, nothing is going to change. We are going to bring Ukraine into NATO. And we were working very hard to do that, despite the conventional wisdom in the West, which says we were not. We were working to bring Ukraine into NATO.
So what options are available in this post-conflict period or mid-conflict period? What are the realistic options now?
There are no realistic options. We're screwed.
I mean, what does that mean practically, though, we're screwed? It means you believe the conflict is now destined to escalate or just destined to grind on?
Well, both. It's destined to grind on, and both sides will continue to escalate. They have been escalating. And where it all leads is very hard to say. There's no deal on the table that can be worked out here. There's all this talk about the need for diplomacy. And I think diplomacy is a very important element of foreign policy, and many American policymakers seem to have forgotten that. And many people in the West now equate diplomacy with appeasement, which is remarkably foolish. So I'm in favor of diplomacy in principle. But the question you have to ask yourself in this particular case is, if you do diplomacy, can you work out a deal? And my opinion is there's no deal to be worked out, and both sides are going to fight this one out.
Why? If John Mearsheimer is by some miracle appointed Secretary of State and you are in charge of negotiating a peace settlement, why can there not be some deal? I mean, the Russians are clearly suffering. They're losing a lot of soldiers. It's costing them dearly. They probably would like there to be some settlement that didn't look too humiliating. Is there not still something along the lines of, I don't know, neutral zones or administered regions, some guarantee not to join NATO by Ukraine, even if the Zelensky government would definitely not endorse that at the moment? Is there not still, in theory, a peace deal to be done?
Not really. I mean, there are two big issues here. One is neutral Ukraine, and then the other issue is the territorial one. The Russians have now annexed 4 oblasts in Ukraine. This is a big chunk of Ukrainian territory. The Russians now believe that that territory belongs to them. Do you think the Russians are going to be willing to abandon that territory in addition to Crimea? I don't think that's happening. I think the Russians have no intention of abandoning that territory, certainly not all of it. The Ukrainians, for their part, insist on getting that territory back. And the Americans would not be willing to concede that territory to the Russians because it would appear to be a defeat for the West. The United States and its allies are in this one to win. Right? We are deeply committed. For us to back off and give the Russians any major concessions is just unacceptable at this point. That's the territorial issue. Then there's the question of whether or not Ukraine is neutral. The Russians insist that Ukraine has to be neutral. The Ukrainians are now saying we're willing to be neutral, but we need a guarantee for our security from someone. Well, the only someone that can guarantee Ukrainian security is really NATO, and specifically the United States. Well, if the United States...
China?
No, that's not in the cards. The Chinese are not going to guarantee Ukraine's security. That's just too far-fetched. And furthermore, they don't have the military capability to do it. It's the United States and its European allies, right? But then Ukraine is a de facto member of NATO, and that's unacceptable to the Russians. So there's no way you're going to get a truly neutral Ukraine that's not affiliated with the West. It's not going to happen, and the Russians are not going to accept that. So what the Russians are going to do instead is they're going to create, if they can, a dysfunctional rump state, and that's what they're doing now. That's why they've taken all that territory, number one, and number two, that's why they're wrecking Ukraine.
What's quite frightening about what you're saying is that actually, if there is no deal to be done, and the logic is that the conflict will just carry on, and eventually more doubling down.
More escalation.
More escalation. It seems from what you're saying that you think we are headed towards some kind of escalated conflict between the West and Russia. Whether that's nuclear or not, the logic would seem, if neither side finds the current status acceptable, and both sides are refusing to concede, that a bigger, much more dangerous conflict is inevitable.
Inevitable is too strong a word.
Likely?
Is likely. That's correct. But I think your description of the present situation is right on the money. And the two outcomes that we have to worry greatly about are one, where the Russians use nuclear weapons, right? And two, where the United States comes into the fight, or the West comes into the fight, because then you have a great power war. The United States and Russia are actually fighting each other. And as Avril Haines, the director of national intelligence in the United States, told the Senate this past spring, the most likely scenario for the Russians to use nuclear weapons is if NATO comes into the fight, right? So this is very dangerous.
So do you now think that some kind of nuclear event is likely?
Likely is too strong a word. The rhetoric I like to use is there's a non-trivial chance that nuclear weapons will be used here. And let me tell you why I think that's the case. If the Russians were to use nuclear weapons, the most likely scenario is that they would use them in Ukraine. And Ukraine does not have nuclear weapons of its own. So the Ukrainians would not be able to retaliate against the Russians with their own nuclear weapons. So that weakens deterrence. Furthermore, if the Russians use nuclear weapons in Ukraine, the West, and here we're talking mainly about the United States, is not going to retaliate with nuclear weapons against Russia, because that would lead to a general thermonuclear war. So the Russians...
Is that certain?
Pardon?
Is it certain that so you think if Putin detonated an actual nuclear bomb within Ukraine, there would be no retaliation by the West?
No, there would be no nuclear retaliation. Macron has said that, by the way. We would not retaliate with nuclear weapons. The great danger is that if the Russians use nuclear weapons in Ukraine, right, that the West would retaliate with a massive conventional attack against Russian forces. David Petraeus, General Petraeus, has said that if the Russians attack with nuclear weapons inside Ukraine, we should take our conventional forces, NATO's conventional forces, and slam Russian conventional forces inside of Ukraine and Russian naval forces in the Black Sea. If we were to do that, we would then have a great power war. NATO would be at war against Russia. And as Avril Haines, the director of national intelligence, said, that is likely to lead to a nuclear war because the Russians would not be able to stand up to the Americans and their allies.
So what would you be advising in the very unhappy event that Russia does launch some kind of nuclear strike within Ukraine? What do you think the wise response is?
The wise response, and I think the likely response, is we would go to great lengths to immediately shut down the conflict. I think the use of nuclear weapons is what would shut down the conflict. It's the only possibility. I'm not saying that would axiomatically happen, but it would become so clear at that point in time that we were in danger of creating a nuclear war between the superpowers that we would go to great lengths to shut it down. That would focus the mind in ways that are hard to imagine in the current context.
I mean, it's a risk that we hope we don't need to take.
But we're actually making it more and more likely. It's very important to understand that the more successful that NATO and the Ukrainians are at defeating the Russians inside of Ukraine and wrecking the Russian economy, the more successful we are, the more likely it is that they will use nuclear weapons. And again, you do not want to underestimate what great powers will do when they're desperate. I'll just give you another example to highlight that. In the summer, late summer of 1945, the United States had defeated Japan. Japan was finished in the summer of 1945. And the United States was unable to get the Japanese to surrender. And we felt that there was a serious possibility we would have to invade the Japanese home islands with amphibious forces. And given the casualties we had suffered at Iwo Jima and Okinawa, the last thing the Americans wanted to do was to invade the Japanese home islands. So, given how desperate we were to avoid that outcome, invading the Japanese home islands, we were willing to drop 2 nuclear weapons on Japan. And of course, we were willing to do that because Japan had no ability to retaliate with its own nuclear weapons against us. The situation is somewhat analogous to the one that the Russians face in the circumstances where they are losing in Ukraine and they are becoming desperate. They could think about using nuclear weapons in Ukraine against Ukraine and not have to fear nuclear retaliation because Ukraine does not have nuclear weapons of its own.
I think you're more sanguine than I would be that Western leaders would treat a nuclear event as a cause to kind of make peace and de-escalate. But I mean,
you
the
may be
rhetoric
right.
among Western leaders at the moment is all very moral. It's very much about teaching lessons, and I find it unthinkable that they would allow exploding a nuclear device to be a way to win a war. Here in the UK, we've had 3 prime ministers in less than 6 months, and each one has recommitted to the Ukraine conflict, has immediately gone to see President Zelensky. It's become very much a kind of article of faith of being a good person in politics now. Have you observed that? And how do you square that with the idea that they would be realistic in the event of a nuclear strike?
Well, I understand exactly what you're saying. And you may be correct that Western leaders will retaliate with massive conventional attacks or even with nuclear weapons in the event the Russians use nuclear weapons inside Ukraine. I'm not saying you're wrong, I'm right. It's very difficult to predict where this war is headed. So I think there's a serious chance that you're right. And that scares me even more. But The point I would make is that once nuclear weapons are used, it will become clear, I think, I hope, to all the policymakers in the West that we have crossed a dangerous threshold. And that what has to be done now is that this war has to be brought to an end immediately before it spins out of control. I mean, you want to think about what the consequences are here. The consequences are that cities will be incinerated. Right? We're talking about a general nuclear war. That's a possible outcome. Right? Just go back to the Cuban Missile Crisis and think about how JFK thought about dealing with the Soviets and how the Soviets thought about the situation themselves. Both Khrushchev and Kennedy understood that this one had to be immediately shut down. We're talking about the possibility of a war escalating to the nuclear level, involving two countries, the United States and the Soviet Union, that have massive nuclear arsenals aimed at each other. Both leaders understood full well this conflict had to be shut down immediately. What do we have today? We have a situation where there's a war taking place, where the Russians are deeply involved, and NATO is doing everything but pulling the triggers and pushing the buttons. Right? This is a very dangerous situation. We should be doing everything possible to shut it down, but that's not happening.
What role do you feel that the UK has played in that? Because most of your focus is the US as the big gorilla in the room, but the UK has been a big part of the defense of Ukraine and has been really leading the charge more than Germany, more than France, and has been perhaps the most robust within Europe. Do you have any comment on the UK response?
I think it's been the most robust within Western Europe. In Eastern Europe, you have the Poles and the Baltic states, which have been every bit as enthusiastic about this war as the British have been. No, I think the British are major cheerleaders. They're pushing the United States to continue its policies with regard to Ukraine, and they're strong allies in this enterprise. I think the British are being remarkably foolish, just like I think the Poles, the Baltic states, and the Americans are being remarkably foolish.
Let me ask you about Sweden and Finland. Would you have foreseen that they would ask to become members of NATO after this crisis? And my final question on Ukraine before we move on, in a sense, it takes us back to the beginning, which is that moment on February the 24th, when Russia invaded Ukraine from the north towards Kiev, from the south, up from Crimea, from the east, was shocking and stunning to many observers. A lot of your realist colleagues said it wouldn't happen. There was a sense that this was an act so far beyond what we consider to be acceptable on the European continent that the response had to be appropriate. And then you say things like, there is zero evidence that Russia wanted to conquer Ukraine. How do you square those? I mean, most people observing that moment felt pretty confident that Russia wanted to conquer Ukraine. Why are they wrong?
Well, there's no evidence that Russia was interested in conquering Ukraine, number one. Number two, they did not try.
It's invading it from all.
That's the size army you need to conquer a country like Ukraine, occupy it, and then incorporate it into a greater Russia. You need a massive army. This was a limited aim strategy. This was not a strategy that was designed to conquer Ukraine. I mean, it's very hard to make that argument in the West at this point in time because the propaganda, which says that Russia was intent on conquering all of Ukraine and absorbing it into a greater Russia, is so pervasive. But anybody who knows anything about military operations knows that you couldn't conquer and absorb Ukraine with 190,000 troops. And so that issue has to be clearly established. What they wanted, what the Russians have said they have wanted from the beginning, is a neutral Ukraine. And if they can't get a neutral Ukraine, what they're going to do is create a dysfunctional rump state. And there's no evidence that you're going to get a neutral Ukraine. And what the Russians are doing is creating a dysfunctional rump state. China is a peer competitor of the United States, and that it is a threat to dominate Asia the way the United States dominates the Western Hemisphere. And the United States does not tolerate other regional hegemons. We're a regional hegemon in the Western Hemisphere. And over time, we have gone to great lengths to prevent countries like Imperial Germany, Imperial Japan, Nazi Germany, and the Soviet Union from dominating either Europe or Asia. From an American point of view, that's unacceptable. And I think that's correct. I think the United States should not want China to dominate Asia the way we dominate the Western Hemisphere. So we're going to go to great lengths to contain China. And for purposes of containing China, it is important for us to defend Taiwan. And from a Chinese point of view, this is categorically unacceptable. Taiwan, from a Chinese point of view, is sacred territory. And the fact that the West is preventing China from reincorporating Taiwan into its body politic is a cause of anger, real anger. So what's happening here is that as the security competition between China and the United States ratchets up in East Asia, the United States becomes more committed than ever to defending Taiwan, to keeping Taiwan allied with the United States and its other allies in East Asia, infuriating the Chinese more and more. So you have this intense security competition setting in. And at the heart of that intense security competition is this potential point of conflict, Taiwan, that threatens to escalate and cause a war.
But I think viewers or listeners might be surprised to hear you on that, because in a sense it's the opposite of your view of the Russia question, that even though China is a regional hegemon, and Taiwan is, whether they consider it part of Greater China or whether it's just too close to have as allied with a foreign power, there is a parallel to Ukraine and Russia. But in that example, you think it would be worth, it is in the strategic interests of the US to actually send forces, risk a greater escalation, and actually go to war, if necessary, to defend Taiwan.
Yeah, I think the situation with China is a lot like the situation with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. I believe the United States had a deep-seated interest in preventing the Soviet Union from dominating all of Europe and dominating all of Asia. For sure, the Soviet Union was a peer competitor of the United States, and I think the United States has a vested interest in making sure that it is the only regional hegemon on the planet and that the Soviet Union not dominate Europe.
Okay, let's wind things up with nice little bit of music here.